Doron, about what's happening on the military front. Not much in Gaza, but today was quite a massive rocket barrage towards the center of Israel.
Yeah, I think he mentioned that he never saw such a challenge. This is a real security challenge. The Gaza city with its infrastructure of underground tunnels, the hostage dilemma, and then you have the northern border that you don't want to wake up, but you have to keep your citizens safe, and you're on some exchange of fire. So Israel is facing maybe one of the greatest dilemma in its history. And right now, forces are prepared in Gaza. I think the northern border, we are well prepared with plans and to react once some threshold is being crossed. But the hostage dilemma really came in the last few days to the forefront, and we'll have to see how this works with the idea of the ground offensive.
More rockets are being
fired
today. And the question is, how many are there? I mean, thousands and thousands.
Yeah, they still can occupy us for days. Luckily for us, we have the Iron Dome. This is really proved itself again and again. But of course, if the northern border starts with the 150,000 missiles that they have, with different kind of accuracy and so on, then even the Iron Dome would have a problem handling it. So, again, dilemma. Our security forces really have to provide some answer in the short time.
Yeah, and many Israelis ask, how did we allow this to happen?
This is a setback that is really, it's hard to consider how did it happen. Our attention was elsewhere. Our attention in the last year was in the West Bank. We had some mini war in the West Bank. And in a grand global picture, we can go into it. We don't have enough time, but I think we really set our attention and our priorities not in the right places.
Yeah, many questions, Ruth. Many questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. We'll go to the city of Ashkelon in the relatively southern part of Israel. I-24 News defense correspondent Jonathan Regev is there. Jonathan, what's the update?
Ashkelon, as crazy as it may sound, there were sirens all over the country. Beersheba twice, central Israel twice, Tel Aviv. Ashkelon, which is the city that was mostly targeted since this war began, was actually quiet today. The citizens here have no illusion that this will be that this will remain throughout the day. They're well aware. We're actually hearing explosions as we speak. Possibly interceptions to the south of us, but we are hearing explosions, and the people here are getting ready, getting closer to the protected shelter, as it may indicate that something may be coming our way. But at least up until now, we've not seen any sirens. Looking up in the sky, I don't see any interceptions at the moment, but we did hear explosions a few seconds ago. Ashkelon, now we're hearing very loud explosions. Seems like artillery, but I'm not sure of that, but we are hearing rather loud explosions. Ashkelon, you can see, I think behind me, there's relatively lots of traffic. If we compare this with Sderot, for example, it's a completely different story. Sderot, a practical ghost town, 90% of the population there is gone. Sderot being a little bit closer to the Gaza border itself, and also a smaller city. Ashkelon is a city of 160,000 people. Even if you want to, you cannot evacuate such a large city. And it is the largest city close to the Gaza border, which is 7 or 8 miles to the south of us. While this is happening, there's constant shelling and artillery of the IDF in Gaza. As the days go by, this fire towards Gaza seems to be intensifying. For the moment, Israel seems to be focusing with attacks from the air through artillery. No ground incursion for the moment. When will that happen? No one is really certain about it.
Okay, Jonathan Regev, thank you very much, in the city of Ashkelon. With me here in the studio now are retired Colonel Alon Eviatar. Thank you very much for coming, and Danny Ayalon, former ambassador to Washington, former Israeli ambassador. UN Secretary General created a stir in Israel by saying about an hour ago that this thing happened not in a vacuum. This is unusual.
It's despicable. It's another, I would say, low, moral low of the UN. You know, Jacob, I happened to serve 4 years in Israel's mission to the United Nations. This is the most corrupt, not just morally corrupt, also in other terms, corrupt organization. And we have to understand why. The UN is made out of the 193 member states, but out of these 193 member states, about 110 are against us. There are 22 Arab countries. They are part and parcel of the 57 Muslim countries, which are part and parcel of what used to be the non-aligned, which are now called in different group of seven. Anyway, 110 are against the West, against the US, against Israel, and they are the puppets of the Palestinians. This is what it is. Now, Gutierrez, if we go back to the Secretary General, who also was the Prime Minister of Portugal before that, he is in their hands in many ways. There were some better, let's say, Secretary Generals who had their own conscience and compass, and they were kind of walking in between the lines and were, more steadfast. This guy is just, totally lost it. I can tell you another thing. At least two, which I happen to know personally because I was approached by somebody to help. Two of the kidnapped, of the hostages, are with Portugal passports. So we tried to contact him to see if he can use his leverage. He's nowhere to be seen. He's no. Really? I think that he should get a message, Mr. Secretary, you are not welcome here anymore, and I don't think we should ever see him again here. And just neutralize him as a factor, because he's not helpful anyway. When the convoys or the trucks of humanitarian aid are coming through the Rafah, and Colonel Eviatar would know it better than me. So they get in there food, medical supplies and equipment, water and all that, no fuel, which is understandable. But I say, why don't Mr. Gutierrez have the very initiative of putting UN personnel, bringing in the Red Cross personnel, put them in the trucks so they go in Gaza, they will be not harmed, and they are the ones who should demand to see the hostages.
Yeah,
but they don't do anything. They are just in the way. They are harmful, and they're not helping not our cause, and at the end of the day, they discredit their own organization. The UN has no credibility whatsoever.
So those who toyed with the ideas that maybe the UN will take over Gaza the day after, this is
I don't think so. We have a history with the UN. The 67 war, the 6 Days War in 1967 happened before the UN. They had the UNIP. They had a peacekeeping force, which first word from Nasser, they took them away instead of saying, no, they are there to stay. And of course, we have UNIFIL, we have other things. They do not stop anything. The same thing here. If anything, I think we should look for some kind of a regional architecture. Maybe some, some multinational force. By the way, with the peace treaty with Egypt,
right?
We insisted not to have a UN, and what do we have? Multinational force with the Italian battalion, American, and so on. Maybe this should be the same structure for the Gaza the day after.
Okay. Alon, let's talk about what's happening in Gaza today. Nothing on the ground. On the other hand, rockets towards Israel. And growing tension between the military and the militant people in the Israeli leadership that want to get in, but the political level says, hold it.
We hear about the question or the debate or the discussion, if you want, between the political level, Prime Minister and others, and the headquarters of the IDF. The question is if and when and in what way the ground maneuver will start. We don't have an answer about that, just rumors, just expectation and so on. But I think that while we are trying to analyze, and I'm saying try, not know for sure, because the Hamas headquarters cover and control the media and the websites and so on in Gaza Strip. When we try to analyze the internal situation in Gaza Strip, and especially inside the top 5, I would say, of the seniors of Hamas headquarters, I would say that during the current situation, they have two strategic goals. One is to delay the option of ground maneuver, the Israeli attack, the war, if you want, inside Gaza. Second, and it's connected each to other, is to control the hostages file or the hostages case, which means that they have, I would say, a huge achievement in their hand, and they know how to play it, to play game with the Israeli side, in order also to continue use the psychological warfare, and in order to, to try to separate between the Israeli society and the government. And second, it's a huge tool for them, for the headquarters of Hamas, also not just to delay the ground maneuver, but also to keep their survival. While they control the situation, despite the huge destroying of Gaza Strip, despite the attack from the airplanes and so on, I think that so far their situation, the political situation, the core of the headquarters of Hamas still exists. And they continue to launch rockets.
Right.
We see the changes on the ground,
and this is something that only ground attack will change.
Yes, just ground attack will have, I would say, huge influence or impact on this case, on this issue.
All right. Even before the Hamas attack, there were significant concerns regarding a widespread conflict. Middle East correspondent Ariel Asaran breaks down the different regional threats endangering Israel.
Hamas's surprise attack on October 7th took an unprecedented toll from Israel's southern communities, both in terms of scope and brutality. But it also threw Israel into a rapidly escalating downward spiral on its northern border and in the West Bank, with the potential of turning into a regional conflict. And then on Thursday, this happened.
The crew of the guided missile destroyer USS Carney, operating in the northern Red Sea earlier today, shot down 3 land attack cruise missiles and several drones that were launched by Houthi forces in Yemen. We cannot say for certain what these missiles and drones were targeting, but they were launched from Yemen, heading north along the Red Sea, potentially towards targets in Israel.
And so from ballistic missiles in Iran to drones from Gaza, rockets from Lebanon, or cruise missiles from Yemen, Israel is perhaps the most threatened country in the world. So what exactly is Israel up against from its various potential and current enemies? Let's start with the most immediate threat, Gaza. Palestinian terror groups, mainly Hamas, have 50 to 60,000 trained fighters, 30,000 rockets and missiles, and dozens of attack drones. To the north, in Lebanon, there's Hezbollah, with 50 to 60,000 trained fighters, 150,000 rockets and missiles, and 2,000 attack drones. Pro-Iranian militias in Syria have dozens of drones, while in Iraq they hold dozens to hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones. The Houthis in Yemen, who've already thrown their towel in the fight, have hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones as well. And then there's the head of the octopus, Iran. Its national and paramilitary forces have over 3,000 ballistic missiles, some of which can reach Israel, and many thousands of attack drones.
We have warned everyone that this conflict can turn into a regional battle if the aggression, brutality, killings, ongoing bloodshed, and destruction against our people in Gaza persist.
With a multi-layered air defense system considered one of the most advanced in the world, and the help of the U.S. Navy, Israel says its military can manage a multi-front war. But it's a scenario it and its allies hope to avoid, provided that it has not already begun.
With us now is Arash Azizi to talk about the Iranian angle. Thank you very much for joining us. Iranian fingerprints all over the place. What's their game plan here?
The regime of Tehran is the only, we have to remember, is the only state in the region that actually wants to fight Israel. No other state in the region no longer has any plans to fight Israel or any intention. The Tehran regime is the only one who is funding Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad for military purposes. Hamas, of course, has sort of relations, political and financial relations with other states, but the only one that has a strong military and sort of terroristic relation with is the Tehran regime. And their goal is one that Khamenei, the supreme leader, defines as a strategic patience usually. So they've increased the capacity of these groups in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, and of course in Gaza, and also West Bank actually. And they've increased their capacities over the past few years, but they're also worried about a broader conflagration. So this strategic dance, if you will, continues as they try to attack here and there, and they try to control these groups. They don't have 100% control, but they have close to that. While at the same time, of course, they're denying any direct operational role by Tehran because they're worried about a possibility of a broader conflagration. Naturally.
How does that resonate inside Iran? How does that affect the internal problems of the regime in Tehran?
The Iranian people as a whole are no fan of this regime foreign policy, and I'm not even saying that as a good thing or a bad thing. Of course, as an Iranian, I'm no fan of it, but vast majority of people in Iran, I think, they're not no fan of this regime. This is shown in many slogans over the years that they've shouted in many demonstrations. The slogans like "Neither Gaza nor Lebanon, I give my life for Iran." Slogans like "Leave Syria, do something for us." Similar slogans against the regime's line, anti-American and anti-Israeli line. And in the last few days, we've seen when a film director tried to speak against Israel in a funeral, she was booed down. When they some regime people tried to sort of raise the Palestinian flag the day after the attacks, many fans in this football game booed him and with sort of very kind of crude slogans and asked him to take the flag down. So, the Iranian people, by and large are no fan of this policy for the simple reason that it has brought them nothing. What has regime's so-called axis of resistance and support for these terror groups like Hamas and others in the region have brought them? It has, for the people of region, it has been killing hundreds of thousands of people in Syria, of course, intervening and violating sovereignty of Arab countries, including Palestine, effectively violating their sovereignty. And for the Iranian people, it has only brought economic misery, international isolation, and only bad news. So Iranians as a whole, the regime of Tehran, Khamenei, do not have public backing for their anti-Israel line.
Mm-hmm. Arash Azizi, thank you very much. Dania Elon, back to you. We almost forgot there's the big one, the bigger conflict. Iran versus Israel, nuclear bomb, threats to bomb Iran. What is all of that?
Well, we see here actually a few layers. We have the local layer of Israel vis-a-vis Hamas, vis-a-vis Hezbollah. Then we have the regional level, which is Israel vis-a-vis Iran, the Ayatollahs. But then there is also the global one, which is the United States vis-a-vis Russia and China. Without the massive economic support of China to Iran, the Iranian would not have been able to sustain all those sanctions. And of course, the political support and military support from Russia. So you can say basically that we are in the midst of a world war. I mean, the manifestation doesn't have to be nuclear Armageddons and bombing all over the world, but this is a world war. And if I look back to the 30s of last year, the World War started 1st of September 1939, but actually it was much earlier when Hitler annexed the Anschluss, Austria, when he moved into the Sudetenland. I mean, the aggression was there, and it was building up to this world war. It seems like this is what we're having now, and I think this is also what the Americans understood right away, that if they do not stand fast and firmly with Israel now, I mean, they do, but in a way that has never been done before, then the chances for miscalculation from Hezbollah or Iran could be much more palpable. And I think they just want to draw the line in the sand, not just for the Iranians and Hezbollah, but also for Russia and China.
Right. Even if Israel destroys Hamas, cleans up Gaza, whatever, still there's the huge problem of Hezbollah in the north. And sooner or later, Israel will have to deal with that.
Yeah, it's one of the topics that we have to discuss, and it's a wide, I would say, a big and huge challenge, rather or bigger than the Hamas issue. I think that if we are speaking about the Hezbollah case, we have to analyze or to go for a wide perspective, not just Hezbollah, but also the northern front, if you want. We include on the same package Hezbollah and its military units and so on. In Syria, we have, during the last days, I saw it myself, you don't need anything to use then films, movies or some kind of indicates in the website, Iranian militias, armed militias. They came from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Iran. All of them belong to the Shia, and they used to cross, I saw it yesterday night, cross the area from, let's say, the center of Syria, Damascus, and so on, to south, to the Golan Heights border, in order to have a threat on the Israeli side, on the northern border as well, together with Hezbollah. So we have two main areas that Israel should challenge it in order to prevent escalation or wide war in this time, in the current time. I think that it will be in the first Israeli priority in the future. What is the future? Nobody can say if it will be next month or next year, but I think that as long as Hezbollah is located in South Lebanon with 150,000 missiles, with all the those Iranian militias and so on, this is the strategic threat on the area of northern of Israel, and I think it still exists despite the fact that so far the escalation with Hezbollah, between Hezbollah and Israel, is limited escalation. I think that it depends also on the improvement or the development, if you want, on the southern front. What will be next months, or I don't know, next week in Gaza Strip will have influence and direct impact on the motivation, if you want, or the interest of the Hezbollah and the Lebanese as well.
Danny, many in the Israeli security establishment thought that it was a good opportunity to attack Hezbollah now. And the Americans are saying no. This is sort of a conflict we haven't seen before, and it looks like the Americans are very firm on that.
Yes. Well, the Americans are firmly behind us, totally behind us, and actually we do need their guidance, because we're talking about the collective memory and capabilities of a superpower. So they understand things in a very, in a broader sense. So from the first day, they said, you take care of Hamas. This is the immediate threat. It's very important that you do obliterate Hamas in such a way that will deter Hezbollah. The whole region is looking now, how will the war end in Gaza? Friends and foes alike. We know that the Arab countries have always been fence sitters to see, where the wind blows, and then they go with the winner. It's very important for the United States that Israel and subsequently the United States will be the winner. So the Saudis, all the countries, will keep with the American camp and not move towards Iran and others. So this is why also they sent, one of the reasons they sent the Eisenhower and the Gerald Ford right away to tell us, the Hezbollah, the North, let us deal with that. First of all, in deterrence.
But, the flip side of this is, how long are you going to stay here with the, are you going to stay here forever?
Well, this is true, but the American concern right now is you have to be effective and you have to show results. If you limit the war to Hamas, you can show great results. If you open another front, it can take much longer. It's going to be much more difficult. And their main concern is a regional war. If Iran comes to the aid of Hezbollah, then the U.S. will have to move in. They don't want that.
All right. Natalie Bloom is one of the survivors of the Nova Rave massacre, what started as a dance festival. Here's her personal story.
We came to the party a day earlier. There was another party nearby. When the whole thing started, we didn't understand what was happening. We heard the rocket interceptions in the air. We heard the bombings. I had an anxiety attack. We started to move towards our cars. The first group of people who left was killed. We started to hear gunshots. We left the party area towards the main road. We saw a line of cars. People told us that there is a terrorist infiltration. At that point, I started to run. I lost contact with my friends. Each one ran in a different direction. I got inside the car of two girls. We heard screaming. We started to drive to an agriculture field. We left the car and started to run again. I saw a police officer yelling at me, "Run fast." One of the girls who was with me in the car got shot in the back. When she fell down, she looked at us. We continued to run. I couldn't help her. I continued to run. We spent 5 hours in the field, and we didn't see any security forces. Then I saw a car. He stopped, and I was shaking. I thought to myself, I hope they're Jews. They yelled at me, "Get into the car." And we drove away. At one point, we had to choose whether to turn right or continue to drive straight through the field. Whoever turned right was shot. I love trance music. I started to go to rave parties during the past year. This is our place. I don't think I'll ever go to a party again. People say that if we stop partying, the terrorists will win. But I don't see myself dancing again. When I danced, people used to smile. They told me, "Don't stop dancing." But I don't think I'll ever dance again.
Yeah, that's the situation. These are the personal stories. We'll take a break now, and we'll be right back with more coverage here on Nightly 4 News.
Over 1,300 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
קיוויתי אדוני כי ישא נפשי ולדברו אכלתי
ולמשמרת נתנו לי אותה תראו אותי נופל
this? I don't know, but and we need.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Welcome back to I-24 News special coverage. We'll go to the northern border of Israel with Lebanon. I-24 News correspondent Robert Swift is there near the border, looking at what he described before as one of the busiest days over there. Let's go to you, Rob, at the north.
So as we're speaking, there's a contact going on behind me. On the hill behind me where you can see the smoke, that appears to be a vehicle or something else that's been struck by a Hezbollah anti-tank weapon. And in response, we've heard a huge amount of artillery fire from Israeli positions firing onto the southern Lebanese side of the border. And just in the last few seconds, we've been hearing automatic gunfire, again coming from the hill. If you see the black smoke to the left of the tower, that is what appears to have been the target of the anti-tank weapon. And then a little further to the left of this, there's white smoke. That has just in the last few seconds appeared there, and it appears to be in connection with the automatic weapon fire that we're hearing. Now, as you can hear, the artillery, the Israeli artillery, is continuing to fire. This is likely looking to suppress Hezbollah positions a bit to the north and the northeast of us in an attempt to prevent them from firing onto this hill that we're looking at right now. We've been hearing small arms fire from a couple of other directions as well, and also drones. And just to give you an idea of how much this artillery can, is firing right now. This is, I think, the 6th time I've been on the border, and I've never heard this much artillery being fired here on Israel's northern border. And several of the times that the artillery is fired, we've heard the shells going over our heads and then hitting targets in kilometers to the north of us. You'll also see on some of the other hilltops around us, there's smoke where other positions have been struck. And this appears to be a pretty significant contact that is taking place here. This comes after a day that's been relatively quiet, with just a single anti-tank weapon being fired earlier at a community not far from here. But as you can see behind me, the confrontations are very much ongoing.
Thank you, Robert. Back in the studio here with Dania Elon and Alon Eviatar. And also let me bring in Hussein Abdul Hussein from the Foundation for Defenses of Democracies. And let me ask you, Hussein, what's the American point of view in all of this? Can you describe it for us?
Well, so far, the American point of view seems to be trying to not let things escalate between Israel and Hezbollah. And I think the American way of doing this is just to send reinforcements to the region, as we have seen with 2 aircraft carriers so far and many anti-missile systems such as Patriot and THAAD. So whether this will deter Hezbollah, we can't tell. But what we know is that so far Hezbollah is going to a controlled confrontation with Israel. So far, it's only been anti-tank missiles, not these big missiles that might activate Israeli defenses such as the Iron Dome.
Why is the United States so concerned about Israel attacking Hezbollah?
I don't think the concern is about Israel attacking Hezbollah. I think the concern is to see this war expand, which will necessarily bring the U.S. into the war. No one knows how far it will expand, and no one wants to see side battles. I think the thinking here in Washington is that for the time being, the focus should remain on Gaza and on dismantling Hamas. And clearly Hezbollah is trying to distract Israel from doing this mission. And clearly Washington is trying to not let Hezbollah distract Israel from what it's currently trying to do.
Okay, let's listen to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken at the UN Security Council earlier today.
First, we all recognize the right and indeed the imperative of states to defend themselves against terrorism. That's why we must unequivocally condemn Hamas's barbaric terrorist attack against Israel. Babies riddled with bullets, young people hunted down and gunned down with glee, young people beheaded, families burned alive in a final embrace, parents executed in front of their children, children executed in front of their parents, and so many taken hostage in Gaza. We have to ask, indeed it must be asked, where is the outrage? Where is the revulsion? Where is the rejection? Where is the explicit condemnation of these horrors? We must affirm the right of any nation to defend itself and to prevent such horror from repeating itself. No member of this council, no nation in this entire body could or would tolerate the slaughter of its people.
Ambassador Ayalon here in the studio. Keeping Iran as it is, and the lesson that many said was learned here, that if you leave it alone, it will grow and kill you. There are some who say, you know, like, I don't know, Senator Lindsey Graham said, let's bomb Iran or something like that, right? Maybe that's the opportunity to get rid of this.
Well, in a clear strategic thinking, you know, in an ideal, let's say, situation without other, let's say, exogenic factors, it makes sense. It makes sense. It could make sense as a huge strategic subterfuge, you know. Hamas right now is contained in its corner. Well, Hezbollah is not expecting. We can do that, or we can do Iran. But this is not how the game is played, especially because the United States is running this game. And the United States does not want a regional war. The United States does not want to be involved, certainly not with the boots on the ground. So what they sent here with the two strike groups of the Eisenhower and Gerald Ford was actually deterrence. So they do not need to use the ground forces, and they do not need to be pulled into a war. And also there is a political consideration, Jacob, that the United States is very fast gearing towards an election campaign next year, which actually it will start January. The campaign really with its full force will start January. You know, it's a matter of 3 months. So this is why the U.S. will do everything in its power to keep this front with the Hezbollah or even with Iran quiet at this point. Now, when everything is said and done, and when the war is over, then there should be some reckoning, not just from Israel's point of view, but from the American point of view. What to do with the Ayatollahs in Iran? Will there be any kind of price exacted from them? And this is a big, big question. By the way, Jacob, I must say that, you know, this was I would say one of the toughest and clearest statement of a Secretary of State of the United States in the UN. It was in this round table of the Security Council,
right.
And actually it was directed towards Guterres. You know, the Secretary General also sat there. You know, usually he presides over the the articles of association over there and all that. From a bureaucratic point of view, technical point of view, I don't know if you had a chance to see him. He was getting smaller and smaller, as Biden said. Where is the outrage? Where is, and he was describing what they did. Parents murdered in front of their children in front. It was a real astonishing message from Blinken in the UN.
Right. Back to you, Hussein Abdul Hussein. Again, the question is, sooner or later, will the United States have to face the Iranian problem? We're speaking about nuclear aspirations and whatnot.
Absolutely. I think all of the wars and the troubles that we see start in Iran, and they'll only end when the Iran regime has ended. Unfortunately, there's no easy way, there's no silver bullet. But if the Ayatollahs understand that their security is at stake when they order their proxies to attack U.S. bases, I think their calculus would change. And this is one thing that America has avoided to do over the past decade. I think at least now we've shifted away from the imaginary theory that came out during Barack Obama's time, when we were thinking of a grand bargain with Iran, when we assumed that Iran is a rational player, and if we remove sanctions, they will become a normal country. Now we are sure that Iran will never become a normal country, that Iran lives off of wars and instructing its proxies to engage in wars. So if the U.S. ever sends Iran this message that your own safety, the regime's existence, is at stake if you order more attacks, then I think the calculus would change.
Alon,
regarding the last report that we have seen just now from your reporter in the northern border, we have to emphasize that, or to remember, that every fire incident like this could escalate in the moment without any capability or any order to control it. Every fire incident, like a launching missile against tanks and so on, could end with casualties, with death Israelis, and then
ignite. But we've been hearing that Israel has been getting ready to attack Iran, possibly. It was an option on the table, and also taking into consideration multifaceted war here. There were talks about that. They were talking about as if like it might happen. It was an option. So maybe that day is nearing.
Maybe, but I think it belongs to the strategic level which connected to USA, to America. It's not on the local level. It's not on the hands of Israel alone. I think it's a huge issue that we should discuss it, but not in the current situation. This is a too complicated situation that we don't need even now to discuss the Iranian nuclear threat and so on. I think that Iran, regarding the last interview, Iran tried to put pressure on Israel from both sides, from the southern front and the northern front together in a parallel time. And this is a huge and new challenge for Israel, for sure. And I think this is the main, I would say, importance of the relationship between Israel and USA regarding the new treatment.
Right, but let me ask you, Basloel, the Israelis were told over and over again that the military is ready for this kind of situation, and even more. And now they go under the cover of the United States. So there's a double message here for the Israeli public.
Yes, it is, but I don't think it's necessary to Israel's detriment, not in imaging, not in the strategic positioning. Look at the great United Kingdom, the great United Kingdom. They needed the Americans. They begged the Americans to come and to help them during World War II. And they took it very, very understandably and with open arms. I think what we need to understand now, and maybe Colonel Eviatar can also relate to that, that the game has changed in such a way that we are not alone anymore. You know, we used to be playing a solist game. You know, we were always alone in our because the situation was enforced on us. Now we are beginning to be part of a coalition. And as part of the coalition, there is a give and take. And there is no doubt who heads the coalition, which is the United States. So certainly we have to defer to the United States in many, many ways. But this is not in any way infringing upon Israel's security or Israel's image. This is a new game right now. And I think we should benefit from that and not look at it as something which is negative.
Okay. Commission, I can add that this is the right point of view. Those who think that the current conflict is between the Palestinians and the Israelis, between the Hamas terror organizations and the IDF, totally wrong. It's wider, it's bigger, and I think we have to discuss the new, I don't want to say third world war, but this is the third world conflict, if you want.
Yeah. If I may say one more thing, Jacob, you asked about Iran, what to do with Iran. I think the messages that Iran received from the United States during Obama and also during Trump was the wrong messages. First of all, the JCPOA, the nuclear agreement in 2015 was very weak. The United States didn't use its leverage. And then when the Iranians provoked American military, whether by sea or air, they even intercepted and shot down an aircraft under Trump, there was no response. So you see how the Iranians are getting more and more bolder.
All right, thank you for that. Thank you, Hossein Abdul Hussein, for joining us for this discussion. Thank you. Now, traces of drugs were found with the Hamas terrorists in southern Israel, among them the Captagon, which is rampant now in the Middle East. With us now is Dr. Julian Kavanagh from Emory University School of Medicine. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What are the effects of Captagon and why it is favored by terrorists like ISIS?
It's a stimulant. In one word, this is an amphetamine. This is an old amphetamine that in the 1960s was used to treat diseases like ADHD or narcolepsy. And it was found very quickly that it became a drug of abuse because the onset of action and duration of action is really quick. And so what stimulants, especially when they become drug of abuse, cause is acting on dopamine. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter of pleasure, of being concentrated. So people who use drugs like Captagon feel hyper-focused, very concentrated. They don't need as much sleep. They kind of feel invincible. They have an increase in their self-confidence. And they also lack sometimes empathy and fear. And since you also have this suppression of appetite and sleep, that's also for something of an operation, so to speak, something that can be used by terrorists. So I'm not surprised at all that the Hamas terrorists would use this drug to get through their horrible deeds.
Yeah, that sounds terrible. It's just ideal for people who are out there to murder other people.
Yeah, I think it's also used probably by the terrorist handlers to condition future terrorist youth that turn into terrorists. Because when you come off of a drug like Captagon, there is depression, fatigue, body aches. So I could also totally see how handlers could condition terrorists to associate the drug with violent acts and ideology, everything that those handlers want them to do, and to use the drug to enhance their control over the youth that they condition to become terrorists. So that's maybe what really encapsulates the relationship between terrorism and the use of this particular stimulating drug, which is also abused by millions of people who struggle with addiction, but should not be seen under the light of this association with Captagon and Hamas, which is very particular. And as much as Captagon is a drug of abuse, the evil of Hamas should probably not be confused because the evil is with Hamas. The evil is not with the drug of abuse, is not with the addiction.
All right, Dr. Julian Kavanagh, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Kibbutz Nir Oz was one of the hardest hit on October 7th. We have toured the devastated area and watch it in the next report.
A tour of this abandoned kibbutz is like entering a war zone, the epicenter of a pogrom, just after the perpetrators disappeared.
That house belongs to Tamir from the kibbutz emergency team. I don't know what happened to it.
The lawns and paths are flanked by burnt houses. Look, they burned down a children's room here. Objects left behind by the looters are scattered around. They tried to steal everything there was. And in the parking lot, the remains from dozens of cars that were set alight. 400 people lived here, a full and vibrant community. Everything is abandoned now. Each house with its own story. Those who were kidnapped, those who were murdered, and those who barely survived. With all this blood here, how did they survive?
They survived, but he was injured. He was blown up. He has a bandage on his hand, but managed to hold the door. And because of that, his family survived.
Her sister's family, they were murdered, all 5 of them. This morning, at the entrance to the kibbutz, we met Ron Bat, who hasn't left since the Hamas rampage.
He goes through the lists point by point, and we take care of it, okay?
He is the one who's trying to gather people's belongings and also oversees the volunteers with the vans who came to evacuate the survivors.
We got an opportunity to hand some of the equipment over to the residents. We have lists of additional residents who are waiting for us to take the things out their homes. We will take any van like this to the family. The volunteers will pack, collect, register each box. And that is what they're doing right now.
Call me if I can organize some friends with vans to come and take out small equipment of the kibbutz members.
What does it do to the soul to see such a thing?
I walked with shivers for several days. It's something stronger than me.
Every laptop you see, take it.
There is not much left inside the homes. The thieves who came in the second wave dismantled televisions from the walls, took laptops and turned over the cabinets in search of jewellery and luxury items. During those hours, we accompanied Omri into the homes of his friends. He talked about everything, but did not say a word about the family tragedy. Are the parents okay?
The parents were kidnapped.
Yours?
Yes, the parents were kidnapped. My father used to be a journalist, and there are articles about him playing the piano. My kidnapped parents are 83 and 85 years old. This whole row of houses, my parents were kidnapped. This is Ofer and his 2 daughters, kidnapped. This is Yuval, here, can't remember his last name. The 2 daughters and both parents, kidnapped.
Is it your parents?
Yes, this is my mother's cinematography. She was upside down. They couldn't move her and she was upside down. Everything is burned. Ashes, ashes, ashes. My parents are among the founders of this kibbutz. Kitchen, living room, small room, attic. This is the piano. There are a lot of videos of my father playing.
Did you manage to understand exactly what happened?
They were in the secure room, but they had no chance to really hold the handle. It's not a handle that locks, and they were probably taken out. They did a search. They're in Gaza, according to the phones. That's all the information we have.
There are many initiatives, private initiatives in Israel right now to help citizens. Citizens obviously were affected by this war tremendously. With us now is Ben Samocha. Good evening, Ben.
Good evening.
I called it before the crypto man, but that's your industry. Tell us a little bit about what you do in this and how that brought you to actually raise funds for people in Israel.
Yes, of course. So basically, I founded the largest crypto website, academy, community, YouTube, podcast, etc., the media channel. Therefore, I have large audience in Israel and many connections. So it was very natural for me when it was Sunday morning, the day after the horror, to put everything on pause and to start talking with my connections and getting volunteers. We set up with a goal to raise as much money as we can via crypto, which means that there's a large international community of crypto holders, Jewish or not, Israel supporters or not, or just see the horrors and want to help. So we called it Crypto Aid Israel, and we gathered a group of, at first, 10, and then within 2 hours already more than 100, and then within 2 days more than 300 volunteers from very reputable and large companies in the blockchain and crypto space like Fireblocks and Market Across and Bits of Gold, which is an Israeli broker, and they've all contributed many efforts to bring this in together. It was pretty insane how you suddenly have 300 volunteers. Every single one of them is split into a different group, and one is in charge of the marketing and the public relations and the website.
There's a unique community, the crypto community, right?
Yeah, it's very special in how we do things, and whether if it's the transparency, because you have to obtain trust. You know, people don't necessarily know me in the international phase. So do they trust me? Do they trust how I handle things? Do they trust the group of volunteers? Which is why we brought in very big companies, also KPMGs, helping us with bridging funds into Israeli banks.
And this is all what, in Bitcoins? Or?
Yeah, so we are raising the funds in Bitcoin, in Ethereum, in stable coins, which are assets backed by dollars, and many other cryptocurrencies as well. We are also in touch with other crypto communities so that they'll be able to donate with their coin. We managed to raise more than $200,000 so far, and to allocate almost 35% of it.
How do you make sure the money goes to where it should?
So we have a team that's dedicated to onboarding nonprofits, be it Zaka, which they were the first donation, so that they have ceramic vests and stretchers and helmets, etc., when they're operating in the field. Whether if it's the Foundation for Advancing the Regional Area of Eshkol, so we donated 100,000 shekels for them to provide shelter for families evacuated from the horrors. Be it Lev Echad, which is a very large nonprofit. It's a project organized by Or Negev and Galil. They are supporting the people of the Otef Aza, the Gaza envelope. So we are in contact with them, and not only that, they also provide us with the proof that what they're doing with the funds, the videos, the thank yous, etc.
Great. Thank you very much, Ben, for coming.
Thank you.
This would be it for us. Stay tuned for more special coverage here on Night 24 News with Kalev Ben David momentarily. Have a good night from Tel Aviv.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Je passe maintenant le micro.
I've been through hell. We never thought we'll reach such a state.
La France est prête.
This is why France is prepared for the international coalition against the Islamic State, within which we are engaged for our operation in Iraq and Syria, to also be able to fight against Hamas.
Mr. Secretary General, in what world do you live?
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. It is day 18 of Israel's war against Hamas. The IDF has stepped up its airstrikes on Gaza, killing the Hamas commander who led the massacre at Kibbutz Be'eri. Hamas, in turn, boosted its launching of rockets into south and central Israel, with a half-dozen minor injuries reported today. Israel's death toll is still at least 1,400. In Gaza, according to the Hamas-controlled health ministry, fatalities rose now to over 5,700. IDF Chief of Staff Herzl Halevi said the army is ready to go into Gaza, but strategic and tactical factors dictate that the time for that is not yet ripe. While many in Israel ask what is the point at which a ground operation becomes absolutely necessary. The president of France, Emmanuel Macron, offered Israel strong support in discussions here with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other top officials, and in a meeting with the families of French-Israeli citizens being held captive in Gaza. And one of the two hostages released last night by Hamas, 85-year-old Yocheved Lipschitz, emerged from hospital and spoke about her imprisonment in Gaza. Nicole Tzedek has more on that in this report.
After 17 days in Hamas captivity, 85-year-old Yocheved Lipschitz and 80-year-old Norit Cooper were released to the International Red Cross, finally back to their families in Israel. Seated in a wheelchair, Yocheved recounts the moment she was ripped away from her home in Kibbutz Nir Oz.
I went through hell. I didn't think or know I'd get to this situation. They went on a rampage in our kibbutz, kidnapped me, laid me over a motorcycle on the side and flew with me through the plowed fields. They blew up the fence, the special electronic fence that cost 2.5 billion shekels and didn't help at all. And masses stormed our houses, beat people, some of them like me, kidnapped. They didn't distinguish between old and young people.
After beating Yocheved with sticks and dragging her to Gaza, her daughter explains Yocheved was led through the underground tunnels in the Strip.
There are huge, looks like a spider web.
Yocheved says she was kept with roughly 25 other hostages before she and 4 others were taken to a separate room to receive medical care.
People were friendly, that they kept the place very clean. They were very concerned about them.
Yocheved's daughter says her mother was treated surprisingly well while in captivity, seeing a doctor on a regular basis and eating the same meals as members of Hamas. This video released by Hamas shows Yocheved shaking the hand of her captors before walking off with the Red Cross. Many are worried this is just part of Hamas's propaganda, fueling their claims they released hostages for humanitarian reasons. Yocheved is just one of more than 200 kidnapped, and the same treatment can't be said of others, including Yocheved's husband, who remains hostage in Gaza.
My mom said that she was treated well and that the people were kind to her. We do not know what is the story of the 175 or so other prisoners. We cannot deduct from it that they too are in a good condition.
4 hostages have been released so far, but at least 220 remain in the hands of Hamas terrorists, including dozens of children and an estimated 20 over the age of 60. The IDF is reportedly dropping these papers throughout Gaza, urging Palestinians with any verified and valuable information to call the Israeli army on a secure line, and they could be compensated with a financial reward. All of this in hopes that the 220 remaining hostages will be brought back to Israel safely and quickly.
And the United Nations today holding its special monthly session dedicated to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But there was nothing usual about the protests outside UN headquarters in New York, with hundreds of demonstrators there waving Israeli flags and holding up pictures of the hostages in Gaza. Inside, Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen addressed the Security Council, beginning with some harsh words directed at Secretary General Antonio Guterres for the way in which he framed the Hamas attack.
It is important to also recognize the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. The Palestinian people have been subjected to 56 years of suffocating occupation. They have seen their land steadily devoured by settlements and plagued by violence, their economy stifled, their people displaced, and their homes demolished. Their hopes for a political solution to their plight have been vanishing. But the grievances of the Palestinian people cannot justify the appalling attacks by Hamas, and those appalling attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people.
Mr. Secretary General, in what world do you live? Definitely, this is not our world. Saturday, October 7, will go down in history as nothing less than a brutal massacre. Saturday, October 7, is a wake-up call for the entire free world, a wake-up call against extremism and terror.
And let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, there at the United Nations. And Mike, some strong words from Foreign Minister Cohen for the Secretary General today.
Wow, oh wow, got personal in there in this Security Council meeting. The ambassador for Israel to the United Nations, Gilad Erdan, calling on Guterres to resign from his position, saying that any organization that was founded in the ashes of the Holocaust to have such a leader espouse those views is sorrowful and shameful. I asked Guterres' spokesperson's unit about his comments today. They told me he said what he said. He stands by it. People are free to say what they say in return. They had no particular comment on the fact that Cohen canceled his meeting with Guterres this afternoon. They said they hadn't even been aware of that except for a tweet that came from Cohen a few moments prior. They said he's not justifying terror in any way. I said, well, look at what he said. He says he doesn't justify terror, but then he lists essentially a laundry list of justifications for what Hamas did. They said, no, you can't identify the problem until you can't come up with a solution to the problem until you can identify what the problem is. That was their way of saying that those laundry lists of grievances on behalf of the Palestinians that Guterres listed was his way of identifying what he says the problem actually is. So a war of words and rhetoric right now between the Israeli side and the UN Secretary General. There is a scheduled, at least a meeting later today between the families of abductees from Hamas and the Secretary General himself. We have not received official word yet on whether that meeting will actually happen, since Foreign Minister Cohen will no longer be visiting the Secretary General's office.
Right, and Mike, we see protests outside the UN in support of Israel and bringing up the hostages issue, and of course inside Israel, bringing those some of the family members there to make that point.
That's right, and that was a focal point of Minister Cohen's speech today. Essentially, look at what Hamas has done here, not only raping, pillaging, brutalizing the equivalent of ISIS, but saying that you can speak to the families themselves here. They can tell you their own personal stories, and that's what they're doing today at the UN. They'll meet with New York's mayor later on today, and then with the members of the American Jewish community. But one thing Cohen did note loud and clear, kind of in the context, Kalev, we used to hear what starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews in the wake of the Holocaust. Well, Cohen said what starts in Israel and on the Gaza periphery doesn't end there. It will filter out to the west with Hamas's stated goal of jihadism. And he said, if you're not willing, the global community is not willing to stand up to it now, it'll be on your doorstep sooner rather than later.
All right, Mike Wagenheim at the UN headquarters in New York. Thank you for that. I want to go down to our defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev in Ashkelon. Jonathan, just in the last hour, some details coming out of a quite serious incident that was prevented at Kibbutz Zikim there on the southern coast.
Yes, Kalev, we don't have all the exact details. We're now at the beach of Ashkelon, a beautiful beach, a beautiful marina here in the southern city, which is now, of course, completely empty. And just about 5 miles or so to the south of us in Zikim, an attempted infiltration into Israel by the naval unit of Hamas. We heard that as many as 9 terrorists may have tried to infiltrate into Israel. The details are not exactly clear now. We know the IDF has killed at least some of them. Did it hit all of them? We don't know. And you can see right behind me, there are soldiers. There are a few groups of soldiers here on the beach looking directly into the sea, because we do not know at this time if all of the terrorists that attempted to infiltrate were actually shot, were actually caught. So the danger still persists. We do know there was an attempted infiltration. We do know that at least some of the terrorists were killed. Is it all of them? We do not know. Once again, I'll mention Zikim is the site of an Israeli community, and also an Israeli base, a base that was targeted in that morning of October 7th. Is the Zikim Beach, roughly 5 miles to the south of us, so it's pretty close. And we do know that on that day, on October 7th, there were attempts by Hamas possibly to also reach here, the beaches of Ashkelon. Eventually, it didn't happen. It may have happened now again, and searches are ongoing there in the beach in Zikim, and a high level of alert among security forces here in Ashkelon, overlooking the beach right behind us.
All right, Jonathan, we are seeing that there is a red alert in the Gaza border area south of you now, and we did see a pretty massive launching of rockets, especially to central Israel today, including here in Tel Aviv.
I think.
Go on, Jonathan.
I think we may even see something to the south of us. It's not surprising, because in the days after the October 7th attack, we've seen a couple of times that there were very large rocket barrages and rocket launches towards areas where terrorists were trying to infiltrate. In the days when the border fence was, of course, still open, there were various infiltration attempts, and every time that there was a large barrage of rockets towards some area, that could have meant that there are attempted infiltrations to that area. So it would not be surprising at all to see at the moment rockets being fired to the area of Zikim, which, as mentioned, is a few miles just behind us. Then it would not be surprising at all to see rockets being fired towards that area. Here, the city of Ashkelon was quiet today, but it's the city that took the biggest amount of rockets so far in this war. No one here in Ashkelon lives under the illusion that the quiet that persisted here today would continue.
All right, Jonathan Regev there in Ashkelon, thank you for that. Well, we're joined in studio by Reserves IDF Colonel Colby Marom, a national security expert on Hezbollah, Hamas, and Israel's strategic situation, and our senior correspondent, Owen Alterman. Colby, I want to get back to the hostage release. Yeah. Obviously, Hamas, for Hamas, this was a strategic move, perhaps to buy time to make propaganda points. Some criticism of that press conference at the hospital today, wondering whether that plays into Hamas's hands by putting parents apparently there was no attempt by the government to debrief Kocher on what to say, and a lot of questions being asked about that.
Yeah, I think, Kalev, the hostage issue is one of the critical and toughest issues on the table. It's one of the war objectives regarding to Israel. We must do whatever we can as a nation to do through the military international community pressure through Qatar or any military means to try whatever we can to release the hostages. Now, I think that the fact that Israel delayed the ground forces invasion for a couple of days, it's the right thing to do. If there is any opportunity right now, through the amazing pressure that United States and other countries put on Qatar, but I must tell you something very clear. In the end of the day, Israel cannot accept the way that the Hamas is going to take their time and release every couple of days, 2 or 3 days. It's not going to work. Israel said very clear, we're going to give a chance to this opportunity for like a week if we're going to have a deal. If not, the ground forces invasion is on the way. We have heard the chief of staff today, it's ready. And let me tell you something else. I know what the IDF is going to do, the plans for the ground forces invasion. Through these battles, I'm sure we'll have other operational opportunities that we're going to try to release some of those, because you can imagine that the Hamas, who is in troubles right now, they release those hostages because there is no question they want to change their image all over the international community, because everybody looks at them as worse than ISIS.
Right.
So
Secretary Cohen said in the UN today, Hamas are the Nazis.
Right. So I think the Israeli delay of the ground forces is the right thing to do. We must do whatever we can, any effort that we can, to try to release those hostages. There is no question about it.
All right, I just want to say just now, reports, air raid sirens going off in the southern Golan, Bnei Yehuda and Givat Yoav, and I know you're familiar with that area in your military career.
I live in the Golan Heights, by the way.
Okay.
And what we try right now, Kalev, we must see the whole picture. The Iranians control the situation. They control the battle in Gaza. They control the attrition war along the Lebanese border. And what they try lately is to remove Shiite militias from Iraq to Syria and try to create a real threat to Israel from another front, the Golan Heights. That's what we see right now, and I can imagine the next couple of days we're going to see a lot of launching of rockets from Syria by Hamas and the Shiite militias from there, or maybe trying to penetrate the Israeli border and attack the Israeli community. That may happen, and that's why the idea.
So what has to be the IDF response? We've seen it operate in southern Lebanon. We know there have been these airstrikes alleged to Israel, but are there more serious actions? Israel will have to step up that?
On the strategic level, the Israeli goals right now is to not initiate a war against the Hezbollah or the Iranians. We have to defend the northern part and keep it as an attrition war as low as we can. It's not we're focused right now on the southern on Gaza because we must achieve a decisive victory against the Hamas. So right now, on the strategic level, we have a real dilemma on the Israeli cabinet, and we took the decision that right now we're going to be focused on Gaza and just defend our border in the north and the Golan Heights as well. We're going to see an Israeli attacks over Syria if we will see that the Iranians increase dramatically their Shiite militias in the Golan Heights, and they try to escalate the situation there as well. But the IDF is ready for that, and I'm sure we're going to see the attrition war keep going along the Lebanese border and the Golan Heights as well.
All right, well, there have been some casualties. We'll be talking about those later. We'll go up to our correspondent in the north. And then in the meantime, though, Owen, lots of diplomacy today, especially there at the UN. Oh, wait, hold on. We are now going to, okay, our correspondent in the north, Robert Swift, is ready for us. And Robert, we are getting air raid sirens in the southern Golan. We haven't seen that part of the north so active. So clearly we're seeing maybe some kind of message here being made by Syria or some of the forces in Syria.
That's correct. Correct. This is to the east of the Sea of Galilee in the southern area of the Golan. It has been relatively quiet there. This is, just for our viewers to understand, this is to the south of the Syrian border, like you say. So this could be due to rocket fire emanating from inside Syria. It's potential it could be long-range launches from Lebanon, or that seems maybe slightly less likely. Now, this is not the first security incidents to take place on the northern border today. But about 2-3 hours ago, there was a pretty concentrated exchange of fire as Hezbollah units fired around 7 anti-tank missiles and a series of mortar rounds onto an Israeli base that was stationed at the top of the hill overlooking the border region. Israeli forces responded with a huge volume of artillery fire in a fight that went on for at least 30-40 minutes. We were there observing this, and the Israeli military also made use of drones to target the Hezbollah units that were firing the missiles and the mortars, and that was actually the second of 2 security incidents. It was that long extended fight, but earlier in the day, during the afternoon, there was a small exchange, a single launch of an anti-tank weapon from a community onto a community just to the north of that, which was possibly a reconnaissance move by Hezbollah before the extended attack that we then witnessed in the afternoon. So there is plenty happening here up on the north, although it did seem quiet to begin with earlier in this day. It's turned out very much not to be the case. It's quiet.
All right. Well, we'll see, and we'll see what develops there out of that. Those air raid sirens in the southern Golan. What set those off? Robert Swift in the north of Israel, then the Lebanon border. Thank you for that. Let me go back to you, Owen, because as I said before, scenes at the United Nations today and exchanges, harsh exchanges. Never an easy time for Israel at the UN, but I can't remember that kind of response by either a Israeli ambassador or official at the UN directed against the Secretary General personally.
Yeah, it's over for Antonio Guterres as far as Israel is concerned. I think we can assume he'll be persona non grata unless he does makes some real effort to walk this back. Not to walk this back, Kalev, but to uproot it from the source and to really apologize. Short of that, I think he'll simply be persona non grata for official Israel and for unofficial Israel for that matter. And I think it doesn't matter which part of the political spectrum, whether right or left, I think there will be consensus on that this was a justification for the act. Whatever his spokesperson said, as Mike said, it just simply doesn't hold up. He was justifying the massacre. He was justifying the killing of babies. He was justifying the taking of 200 hostages. He was justifying the taking of Holocaust survivors hostages. That's what he said. And when you say that, you will become persona non grata, not just to official Israel, but across Israeli society. And Kalev, you're right to focus on this because people in Israel like to beat down the UN, and it's understandable why. But the UN isn't one thing. The UN is many things.
But I'm going to just interject a note that until this point, Antonio Guterres, within the relative terms of the UN and past secretaries general, was seen as somebody somewhat sympathetic to Israel.
And not only that, but in general, secretaries general have been reasonably well received, given the attitudes and the tension with the UN here in Israel. And that's my point, is that the UN isn't one thing. The UN is many things. Right? Of course, there's the Human Rights Council, which is a world unto itself and a subject unto itself. But the UN is also a wide range of humanitarian agencies, of peacekeeping forces, with which Israel has various different types of relationships. Also agencies that have nothing to do with security, right? That have to do with health and food and technology. Right. And of course, the Office of the Secretary General as well. And the relationships with different parts of the UN on Israel's part are different. And you're right, the Secretary General historically hasn't always been an office with which Israel has always had consistent tension. But now it's different. And again, Antonio Guterres, I think we can safely say from this moment, persona non grata in Israel. Official Israel simply won't have anything to do with him. And I think large parts of unofficial Israel across the political spectrum, won't have anything to do with him until we see some serious move on his part. The ball is deeply in his court.
Right. I think Secretary General lost this game because the humanitarian issues are going to be all over the war if you look like weeks ahead.
And he will have no credibility. Yeah. He'll have no credibility in Israel on anything he says.
He should be as Secretary General that lead those efforts. Now he lost the Israeli side with his terrible words because he totally misunderstand the terrible attack that Israel had two and a half weeks ago.
Mm.
So.
And I want to just go back to the Yocheved Lipschitz, the hostage, released hostage who gave this press conference apparently today. Again, it has to be remembered, it looks like Hamas planned to release her, so maybe kept her treatment fairly better than maybe even some of the other hostages. We don't know that. Her husband is still being held captive there. So obviously she has to be careful about the words. And there was criticism of the government today that they did not direct the situation in a way or help frame the message. There apparently was no involvement by government offices in terms of this press conference.
Yeah, I think the reporting on that is all over the place. There's some reporting that the government was involved. Look, all well and good, but at the end of the day, this is a private person. This is an individual citizen who's going to have the freedom to be able to go and say whatever she wants. And I think the job then is to, again, put this all in the proper context, to explain exactly what the context is. And I do wonder if from the perspective, and we obviously have to ask the families how they feel about it, but if from the perspective of the families, if this gives them some comfort about what has awaited their loved ones in Gaza, and if that can give us some small sense of comfort as well.
I don't know about that because, again, even as we heard from her, I think it was her daughter there saying, there's no way we could determine what the circumstances of the other hostages, some of them, for example, not being even be held by Hamas, but being held.
Absolutely, and I'm sure the treatment of soldiers may well be different than the treatment of civilians, for example. So you're absolutely right. I think that putting this in context is extremely important. I think the media has been at it all day, at least here in Israel, and we hope in other parts of the world as well.
Because of the crazy numbers, the Hamas is trying to control the situation, know who held other hostages, and some of them are held by private people in Gaza. So this is one of the problems. And I'm telling you that the best brains of the Israeli intelligence are focused on getting information from, because the numbers are crazy, and we try. This is our focus to know, get any
where they are. Of course, that would be the key, especially when we look at potential efforts to free them or how it may impact on a ground operation. We'll talk more about that ground operation when we come back. Kobe Moron, Owen Alterman, stay with us. Stay with us. We do expect the IDF spokesperson to give his nightly briefing. We'll bring you that live as it happens. We'll be back in about 3 minutes here on I-24 News. Stay with the channel.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Over 1,300 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News. Now, the Israel Security Agency, better known as the Shin Bet or Shabak, together with the Israel Police, have released footage from the interrogation of Hamas terrorists who were captured following their deadly rampage on October 7th. Now, the footage clearly shows how the Hamas operative was given explicit instructions to kill and kidnap civilians, including the elderly, women, and children. Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran brings us the horrific testimonies of the terrorists.
After the IDF shared with hundreds of foreign journalists body cam videos and pictures from Hamas's October 7th onslaught on southern Israel, the Shin Bet and Israeli police shared footage from interrogations of Hamas terrorists from Gaza who participated in the destruction and mass murder. In it, they describe in detail how they were ordered to kill and kidnap women and children.
مسؤول فصيل.
مسؤول فصيل؟
شايل محمد المجدلاوي.
وين ساكن؟
من صراف.
لأي منظمة أنت تابع؟
حماس.
قولي شو المهمة كانت تبعتكم؟
خطف يعني. زي كذا.
خطف وأسر من كفر عزة؟ لما أحكوا لكم يعني قتل وأسر منتو رايحين على مستوطنة فيها مدنيين، عارفين هذا الشيء. قولي المهمة تبعتكم شو كانت بالضبط لما طلعتوا؟
هو السيطرة على موقع صوفا.
السيطرة شو تعملوا؟ السيطرة ايش؟
مركز فين؟
شو تعملوا في اللي موجودين؟
هو تسيطر عليهم، تقتل يعني.
The detainees said in their investigations that they received orders to kidnap as many people as they could, specifically women and children, and to kill the rest.
لأنه في غزة اللي باخذ أسرى له مكافأة.
قديش المكافأة قالوا لكم؟
شقة، منزل، بيت و$10,000.
اللي بيجيب كل أسير باخذ شقة ومنزل؟ مين قال لكم إياها هاي؟
كانوا يحكوها في القسام يعني.
وشو عمل القسام يهبري؟ قتل. مين قتل؟
مدنيين. دخلوا 2 على البيت. ضل في غرفة في الوجه مسكرة. طخ على الباب صار في صوت جوا. دخلوا كمان 2. كان في واحد مرمي على الباب زوامية، كان في دم جنبه طبعا، كان في جوا زلمة مصاب، وأنا متوقع انها عائلة كاملة.
دخل اول دار وثاني دار كانت المرأة، طخها حمزة على باب الدار.
واللي المرأة لما شفتها يعني شو شفت عليها؟
شفتها انا مرمية بس ما قربتش منها يعني، طلع الكلب تبعها بالشارع طخيته انا.
شو عملت؟ طخين على الشبابيك والابواب. ومين طخيت هناك؟ طخيت مرة كبيرة. هي كانت قبالة ولا ايش فاهمني؟ تفاجأت فيها طخيت. شو عملتوا كمان في الدور؟ ولعنا دار، دارين ولعنا.
سكروا الباب اللي جوا الغرفة المحصنة، بعدين لفوا صار طلع برا عماد ابو عبيدة، صار يقولوا في يهود هان في يهود ايش، وكان الشباك مسكر حديد، صار يقولوا لهم افتحوا اطلعوا افتحوا، ما رضيوش كانوا خايفين، جابوا عقدة مسطرة حطوها على الشباك وفجروا الشباك، فتح نتفة صغيرة، صار يولعوا، اجى واحد صار يولع قطع قماش بداخلها، يقول انه منخنقوا من الداخل.
كان معهم اسلحة يدافعوا عن حالهم؟
لا، ما اطلقوش نار بالنار.
With many around the world denying the atrocities that were committed against innocent Israeli civilians, Israeli interrogators asked the detainees what Islam has to say about what they did.
حسب الدين الإسلامي، مش أنت إسلامي؟ الدين الإسلامي بيقول لك هيك تعال اقتل. لا، خليني أفهم. هذه التصرفات أنت ما بتشوفها يعني مش زي داعش هيك قتل المدنيين عشوائيا؟
صحيح.
الدين منع عن يعني النبي قال لا تقتلوا امرأة، لا تقتلوا طفلا، لا تعقروا امرأة، لا زي فاهم علي؟ الدين ما بحث على التشويه والتنكيل
The arrested Hamas terrorists point a blaming finger at their leadership, who seeks refuge abroad, while Gaza is laid to rubble.
ليش القتل هذا كله؟ شو اللي صار؟
مضحوك علينا احنا منهم. مغرر فينا ومضحوك علينا منهم.
من مين مضحوك عليكم؟
انتين حماس. هم قاعدين في الدور وسايبيننا هنا وسابونا جوا.
يعني هيك بتفكر انت؟
هيك بفكر. يعني هم اللي في قطر ولا في تركيا وبيحكي باسم الأقصى والمسلمين وقاعد غادوا بعتنا هنا. هيك هم غادوا هاي برضو أهالينا بغزة يعني قاعدين بنقصفوا.
واللي بتقول هذول دمروا غزة. في ايش دمروا غزة؟
في كل هاي انت شايف ضايل غزة؟ لا. ضايل غزة لا. دمرت يعني غزة. مين اللي دمرها؟ بإيديهم وبإيدينا دمرنا غزة.
Quite a disconnect between what they say and what they did. Kobe Maromo, we're getting some information about what happened there in the southern Golan Heights.
We actually had a few minutes ago we have a few rockets that were launched from Syria, as I imagine, to the Golan Heights. There is no casualty, and Israel responded with artillery. But Caleb, let me tell you what's happened in the last 2.5 weeks in the northern front. We actually facing a multi-front challenge right now, and we have a fighting situation along the Lebanese border. We saw in the last 2.5 weeks the Hezbollah launch missiles to all over the front. They penetrate the Israeli line with 4 Palestinian groups. They shoot anti-tank weapons against our positions, our tanks, and our communities. And we evacuated over 60,000 people all over the border, including Kiryat Shmona, which is the capital of the Golan, the Upper Galilee region. Now, the big question on the Israeli table is the Iranians and the Hezbollah are going to initiate a comprehensive war. As an expert, I'm telling you, I doubt. Why? Because right now, in the last 2.5 weeks, they lost the surprise. You know, the readiness of the IDF in the communities and along the border is really high. The backup of United States, the military presence over the Lebanese shore coast really deterred the Iranians. And when Nasrallah looked to the pictures from Beirut, from Gaza, he knows that if he's going to initiate a war against Israel, that's how Beirut is going to be, looks like. But the most important thing, the Iranians has so much to lose in Lebanon. They build this crazy capability, over 200,000 rockets and missiles, to deter Israel to attack their nuclear facilities. And I don't think they're going to waste this amazing ability just for the Hamas. So the bottom line, maybe we'll see an escalation when Israel is going to operate their invasion over Gaza. I don't think the
Iranians you are the expert, but there was some of the same thinking or logic there about Hamas in the Gaza Strip, which is they've now got too much to lose to do this kind of attack.
No, you're right. That's why the IDF is ready for this option. But if you ask me, I don't see the Iranians are a very tough enemy, escalate the situation, losing so many capabilities that they took them decades to build this crazy capability across the border all over Lebanon, and they control Lebanon. They know that Israel is going to destroy totally all their missile sites, the accurate missiles, all the capability that they built since the Second Lebanon War. So that's why right now it's really low. But on the other hand, the IDF must be ready for any option.
Right.
This is the bottom line.
But of course, something inadvertently can happen. I mean, what if so far we have been casualties? I think 8 casualties are there. If there is a rocket that causes serious Israeli casualties, there are still some civilians in the north there. Israel will have to step up its attacks, won't it?
Right. But right now, the cabinet took the decision to be focused on Gaza and just defend the northern port. This is something very important. We're not going to initiate an attack, a ground force attack right now. I think everybody in Israel is understand, Kalev, that our strategy for decades was totally wrong. The fact that we have a restraint policy along this border and allowed the Hezbollah again and again to attack and deploy was a terrible mistake. But we have to be smart enough to initiate a war against the Hezbollah on the right timing for Israel.
All right, let's go to the north now, and our correspondent Robert Swift to get what the latest is about that incident that we've just been talking about in the southern Golan. Rob.
Yeah, so that's right. So just to update on that, it's understood that there was around 5 impacts in open areas, and it does appear at this stage that the fire has originated from Syria. Now, the Israeli military is responding to that fire with artillery. If that was the case, then this would be a slight difference in the security incidents that took place earlier in the day, as the 2 previous security incidents were attacks that emanated from Lebanese territory. So this would be the first one from Syria.
All right, we'll have to follow this up, see how this develops. Robert Swift there in the north. And as I thank you, Robert. And as I just mentioned a moment ago, while we have been focused on the personal tragedies around the hundreds killed or kidnapped in southern Israel, there have been casualties in the north as well. 8 Israelis killed by cross-border fire or incursions from Hezbollah and other terror groups in South Lebanon. 7 soldiers, 1 civilian. Now, the first of those fatalities came on October 9th. It was Lieutenant Colonel Alim Abdullah, deputy commander of the Baram Brigade, shot dead in a firefight with infiltrators on the Lebanese border. Alim, from the village of Yanujat, served in the IDF for over 2 decades. And his sacrifice also highlights the contribution of soldiers from the Druze community to the defense of Israel. Well, joining us now is Rami Saad. He's the cousin of the late Lieutenant Colonel Alim Abdullah, killed on the Lebanon border, and he joins us from Yanujat. Rami, thank you for joining us. First of all, tell us a little about Alim. He sounds like a very special person.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He's so special. He was first of all, as a human being, he was a great person, a great human being with a lot of values as a person. You could see him in every single event here in the family, in the extended family as well. You can see this person taking care of everything, helping everybody with a lot of and big values as a human being. It's a big loss for us as a family, all of us.
So, Rami, what could you tell us about not just that day when he had to go to the north, but how he reacted to when the news first broke on October 7th, and he knew there was going to be trouble, not just in the south, but likely in the north too?
Yeah. So first of all, I would like to say here, if Alim wasn't there and he wasn't react and respond according to what he was supposed to do, probably we would see what in the north of Israel, a case study exactly what would happen in the south. There's 2 settlements over there called Arab Ramshi, and they admit both these terrorists were expecting to attack these 2 settlements over there, and the brave heart of Alim and as a commander, the way he was attacked all of these and stopped in his body, let's say. And today we hear the story from a first voice of a soldier that was there. He told us in these words, Alim stopped it in his body, this terror attack, and prevent a big slaughter in the north of Israel in these 2 settlements. At the time here in the communication that there is a terror cell in the north of Israel that attacked his colonel, Alim officer. He immediately step in and start fight them, and he killed 2 of them, and unfortunately he was killed as well.
Right. Now, Rami, you know we're an international channel, and I'm not sure a lot of people abroad even understand the role of the Jewish community, especially the role it plays in the defense of Israel idea. Frankly, I'm not sure enough people in Israel appreciate that. But let's talk about that in the context of what Alim's life, not just what he did this weekend, but his life and in the Jewish community in the battle that Israel finds itself in now.
Yeah, so thanks for raising this point. Yeah, the Jews we are a minority in Israel. We are 120,000 people all over living here in Israel. We are serving the army, and we are fully support Israel. We have a big faith in this country. We love this country, and we all in with the country. And the same, everybody that we grow up on love the country, same Alim. He grew up. He was sure that he's going to serve the army and be an officer, and he exactly did what he wanted, and even he reached a high level on progress over there as a lieutenant colonel. This is something that describes so many Druze people and Druze guys that like to serve the military and be part and take care of this country, same as the Jews. And so we deeply feel and believe we are part of this country, and we have deep faith to protect it and serve in the army wherever we will ask to do that.
Right. Rami, I have in the studio here Reserves IDF Colonel Kobi Marom, who served in the North, and he wants to say something. He knew Aleem.
I knew Aleem very well. I met him a few weeks ago on the border of Lebanon. He was a wonderful person and a great commander. And it shows you, Kalev, the real and amazing commitment between the Jewish community and the Israeli society. In my career for 25 years, I had so many soldiers from the Jewish community and commanders under my command, amazing soldiers and commanders, and it's keep going all the way. And I think we should appreciate that. And Aleem was really special, and I'm so sorry for this loss.
Well, Rami, we say in our faith, may his memory be a blessing. It certainly sounds that will be the case with Aleem. Thank you for coming this evening and telling us about him.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, Rami Saad, thank you. Well, that says a lot there to hear about the bravery and the courage. And to a reminder, we shouldn't just tell stories about the victims that have, unfortunately, there's so many, but also about the heroes.
In this case of Aleem, and on the October 7th, in a terrible attack that we had, Caleb, we have so many commanders that were leading the fighting against the Hamas, and we lost battalion commanders, brigade commanders during this battle on October 7th, because as part of the values of the IDF, the commanders in any rank leading the assault and leading the fighting against the Hamas.
Right, and also many Bedouin, I should say. There were some Bedouins in the south also.
Right.
We've presented some of their stories who have been extremely heroic. I want to go back to diplomacy a bit. French President Emmanuel Macron today became the latest Western leader to visit Israel in a show of support, meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, President Herzog, other top officials, as well as the families of French Israelis who have been killed or kidnapped by Hamas. Macron, at one point, even suggested that the same Western alliance that worked together to take on and target ISIS should now be turned against Hamas. This was at a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Let's listen to those statements.
The test for the West and for civilization is Hamas. If Hamas emerges victorious, we will all lose. Europe will be endangered. Everyone will be endangered. Civilization will be endangered. So if Hamas wins, if Hamas loses and is defeated, then the forces of civilization win. That is why this battle is not merely our own. It's Europe's battle. It's America's battle. It's civilization's battle. It's the battle for the heart and soul and the future of the Middle East and the Arab world.
This is why France is prepared for the international coalition against ISIS, within which we are engaged for our operation in Iraq and Syria, to also be able to fight against Hamas. I proposed to our international partners, I discussed it with you this morning, that we can build a regional and international coalition to fight against the terrorist groups that threaten us all.
Well, let's just go to the IDF briefing by Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari.
Still in the process of working against the squad that has arrived in Israel by sea. This is still ongoing. The goal of the IDF is to dismantle Hamas. Hamas terrorists are hiding inside your homes, Gaza citizens. They're hiding in your streets, and we will not stop, will not cease from hunting them. So we urge them, we urge you rather, to leave the city of Gaza and to move south across the Gaza River. There's a massive humanitarian effort to, with food, with medicine, with water. There'll be no fuel entering Gaza. Hamas stole fuel from UNRWA. They can return it so hospitals in the Gaza Strip can use it. The IDF met forces today on the ground and was impressed by the preparations on the ground, by the readiness of the forces. Today we saw a recording, we heard a recording of one of the vile terrorists massacred Jews on Saturday and bragged to his parents that he succeeded in his vile mission. The Internal Security Agency obtained this recording, and we are debating among ourselves on each and every such recording or the communication whether to publish it, but we need to show the world, and we will continue to reveal to the world the horrors of the massacre. In the north, IDF forces are protecting the area and are attacking squads of terrorists. Hezbollah chose to fight a war that has nothing to do with the Lebanese people or with the country of Lebanon, but rather chose to fight alongside Hamas ISIS. We all updated the going back to school policy in the home front. Keep adhering to the home front command orders. It's important to make sure you do. Sometimes there are times or days or areas where there is no rocket fire at all, but we should not lose our alertness. We should allow a normal life routine alongside the fighting, alongside the war. So far, updated 222 families of the hostages. I would like to address briefly the statement of Yocheved Lipschitz, who was released. And the only thing I wanted to do is to hug her when I saw her at the press conference. Neither one of us will be able to walk in her shoes and understand the scope and scale of the horror she went through. An old woman who was kidnapped from her own bed in the kibbutz on Saturday morning, brutally kidnapped by terrorists, being transferred to Gaza alongside other hostages, and her husband is still there, kidnapped in the Gaza Strip. I wish her that she will get well and better soon, and the IDF and I will do whatever we can to get her husband dead and all the other hostages. A few words in English now.
תת-אלוף דניאל הגרי, דובר צה"ל, אומר בתגובה אולי לדיווחים על כך שחמאס דורש הכנסת דלק.
All right, that was IDF spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari. Also, IDF Chief of Staff Herzl Halevi did speak himself earlier today, addressing the question of the Army's preparedness to launch a ground operation into Gaza. Here's some of what he had to say.
The IDF and the Southern Command are preparing high-quality attack plans to achieve the goals of the war. I want to make this clear. The IDF is ready for ground operations and will take a decision together with the political echelon regarding the manner and timing of the next stage.
Well, Kobe, the question is, he says the Army is ready, but there's tactical, strategic considerations. The question is, what specifically are they, and when will they be?
First of all, I think what we had on October 7, it was a terrible failure from the intelligence point of view and the operational point of view. And I think if we want to achieve our goals that the cabinet actually defined for the IDF, we must operate. There's no question about it. We must operate a heavy ground forces invasion to Gaza, because with all the respect to the heavy airstrike, the majority of the Hamas infrastructure is still operated. The command center, everything is underground, the missile site, the storages, everything. So we must be there to destroy. If we want, in the end of the day, destroy totally their military capability, we must maneuver our troops, and that's why we try to maneuver the civilians and do not allow the Hamas to use their people as a human shield. Now, the bottom line, I think Israel, it's going to take a while. It's going to take weeks, at least. But in the end of the day, today, Kalev, we must have a decisive victory, because the thousands of people that used to live in those communities along the border will not return to their communities if the situation will be totally different. And the decisive victory of Israel must be a message, and a clear message, to the Iranians and the Hezbollah and other players across the Middle East. That's very important.
All right, certainly it is. And let's just go back to the comments by the French President Emmanuel Macron on saying about this regional force dealing with it, which is maybe a step further than even Israel has talked about, Owen.
Right, before we get to Emmanuel Macron, I think we have to pause for a minute on Daniel Hagari, who said a couple important things, the IDF spokesperson. Sure. The most important thing, and I think the headline that's going to be broadcast around the world, no fuel going into the Gaza Strip. The contention from Daniel Hagari is Hamas stole the fuel, right? Remember those 36,000 liters, the tweet that the UNRWA relief agency put on and then deleted, that whole story. And he basically says, Hamas should give it back. There's enough fuel for the hospitals. We don't need to be giving the fuel or allowing the fuel to go through. It's up to Hamas to be responsible in the first instance for the civilian needs of the Gaza Strip between these hospitals. It's on Hamas.
And the IDF actually put out photos of fuel tanks that they say Hamas is the supply of Hamas.
Right. All well and good. The problem is it's hard, Kalev, to see this argument holding water and being sustainable. Look, again, we've had false deadlines from humanitarian workers in Gaza in the past. I don't envy their position in so many ways, but they are now saying that if there isn't fuel in X number of hours, then the hospitals won't be able to function. If there's not fuel, the trucks won't be able to actually take the food and water that the people who evacuated to southern Gaza need. I mean, these are serious considerations that Israeli policymakers are going to have to confront. And nobody is talking about sending flowers or even toys, okay, into the Gaza Strip, but basic humanitarian, and nobody's talking about electricity for private residences, but basic needs for people to get food, water, medicine, and necessary medical care are simply going to have to be met. And even if, in principle, the Israeli position is right, the Hamas stole the fuel from the hospitals. Right. I mean, imagine that. Sure. I think that this position is not going to be particularly sustainable.
Well, unfortunately, we can't. That's a good question, but we do have to go for a break. We're coming to the end of this hour of this broadcast. Colby, thank you for joining us. Owen Altman, please stay with us. We'll be back in about 3 minutes at the top of the hour for more of the special broadcast on I-24 News. So please stay with us.
Is far more susceptible to damage than previously believed.
Stress is power conferred upon something, and when that power exceeds a certain level, the something will break down.
At her lab in Hebrew University's Edmund and Lily Safra Center for Brain Sciences, Professor Hermona Sarek is proving just how permanent that damage is.
There's a major difference between our brain and other tissues in our body. So muscle cells can be replaced. Blood cells are replaced on a daily basis. But the nerve cells we have in our brain, that's what we got born with, and that's it for the rest of our lives. We've examined recently what happens to a young mouse, 7 days old, when it's stressed. And a mouse that has been subjected to that type of stress will be an underdog forever.
What Professor Sarek has discovered is that it alters the physical brain, sometimes permanently.
We analyzed those genes and we found genes that are modified.
These physical stress reactions can actually cause degenerative brain disease.
When they fail to vanish, you get diseases. When they accumulate over time without being removed from the cells, this is when you get damage, permanent damage.
So not only do the effects of stress accumulate forever, they can then pass to future generations.
We need to pay special effort to avoid stress being inflicted on the young ones, because it's much more dangerous to them.
1,800 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
Welcome to or back to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. Now, since October 7th, of course, we have been bringing you at I-24 News tragic stories about the victims of the Hamas attack on southern Israel. But some amazing stories of heroism and survival have also emerged from that terrible day. One of them is of a man we can only identify as Mickey because he is an officer in an elite commando unit of the Israel police. And as we see in this report adapted from Israeli television's Kan News, on that morning when Hamas terrorists invaded his home on kibbutz Nachal Oz, Mickey put his own very special set of skills to use in making sure that he, his wife, and his young daughter emerged from their ordeal alive.
تم تحرير الأراضي المحتلة والآن نحن في أراضينا المحتلة بنمشي ولا حدا من الجنود موجود.
הרגע שסיכמנו בינינו, עניין של שנייה, אני מסמן לה שאם הם נכנסים, אני לא הולך איתם, אין סיכוי. והיא מאשרת לי לראות בכולנו. היא אמרה לי כן, היא ענה לי שכן.
אני מבינה שזה הולך להגיע. רציתי שזה כבר יגיע ונגמור עם זה.
ההחלטה הייתה מאוד החלטית שעכשיו אנחנו לא הולכים איתם.
אתה מאמין שהיית יכול לבצע אם היית נאלץ?
הייתי מבצע את זה, כן. הייתי מבצע את זה. לגמרי.
אנחנו מסתכלים אחד על השני, ואנחנו כאילו שהילדה לא תשמע, ואנחנו אומרת לו, וככה על הילדה. אנחנו לא יוצאים. כן, אתה לא מוציא אותו.
הגורל של מירי, מיקי וביתם הקטנה נטע אמור היה להיות דומה לזה של משפחות רבות בקיבוצי עוטף עזה, שנרצחו באכזריות לא נתפסת בתוך הבתים שלהן. פרט אחד חשוב שיחק לטובתם, והוא שהציל את חייהם. מיקי, לוחם באחת מהיחידות המיוחדות של משטרת ישראל.
איך עם אקדח? מול RPG, מול קלצ'ניקובים, מול רימונים? אקדח?
אקדח.
גלוק? איך?
דווחים קצרים, דיוק, קור רוח. זהו, וחתירה למגע.
כי מה הייתה האופציה השנייה? להסתתר ולא להגיב?
אז זה לא הייתי שורד.
לא הייתה אופציה כזאת מבחינתך?
גם לא הייתי שורד, לא היינו שורדים את זה. החתירה למגע והתגובה היא בעצם זאת ששינתה שם את התמונה.
6:30 בבוקר, 7 באוקטובר בנחל עוז, תופס אותם כשמטח של פצמ"רים בלתי נפסק משוגר לעבר הקיבוץ. הבת הגדולה שלהם, עופרי, ישנה לילה קודם לכן עם חברות באוהל, ואחרי שהם מוודאים שהיא נכנסת לממ"ד ושהיא במקום בטוח, הם חוזרים הביתה.
40 דקות אחרי כבר התחלנו לשמוע יריות שבהיקף של הקיבוץ. אני עוד חשבתי שזה הצבא או משהו על הגדר, שזה קורה לפעמים. ואז אתה מבין שהיריות מתחילות להתקרב אליך, זה נשמע יותר חזק. פתאום מקבלים הודעות בוואטסאפ של אנשים שיש מחבלים בבתים. צרחות, אתה מתחיל לשמוע. קולות של ערבים בכל מקום. כמויות של מחבלים. וצועקים במגפונים שהקיבוץ שלהם ושצה"ל לא נמצא. ומי שנמצא שיצא ויחנה, ואם לא הם ייכנסו אליו, ואנחנו אז הדין אל-קסאם פה, וחמאס, וכל מיני יחידות שלהם. הכנסתי את אשתי ואת הילדה לממ"ד, הסברתי להם שיהיו בשקט. באותו שלב כבר לא הייתה לנו תקשורת, לא היה חשמל.
ואלי הרגיש שמשהו מוזר קורה, ואני הייתי בטוחה שזה הצבא, יורה.
מיקי לוקח מיד את אקדח הגלוק 19 שלו ומתחמש במחסניות רבות ככל האפשר.
הייתה לי בעצם באקדח מחסנית בהכנס, עוד מחסנית אחת עליי, ושהבנתי שאני צריך עוד מחסניות, היה לי מין איזה סליק קטן שלי לימים האלה. חיכיתי בבית, בסלון, פתאום התחילו לנפץ את התריסים, את הזכוכיות של החלון. בהתחלה זה התחיל מכיוון אחד, אני רצתי לצמוד לממ"ד, לחדר שינה שלנו. תפסתי פינה, חיכיתי טיפה שהם ממש יפרצו את החלון וייכנסו פנימה, ואז פשוט יריתי בהם, יש שם איזה 3 מחבלים. יריות של טווח 0 לראש, פגיעות כאלה. ראש, גרון, כתף.
כל כך קרובים?
כל כך קרובים, כל כך קרובים. אני זוכר גם את הצעקות שלהם, אני גם זוכר את הבחור שמת שם, איך קוראים לו, את הלחץ שהיה להם. אחרי כמה שניות, חלון שני, בצד השני של הבית מתחיל להישבר. אותו דבר, רץ לשם, אותו קרב, פחות או יותר, על החלון, מנטרל את זה. מתארגן שוב פעם, ואז אני שומע את המגיעים, כמות די רצינית, אתה שומע, הגיעו מאיזה ג'יפ, אתה שומע את הכוחות שהם יורדים וצועקים ומאוד מאוד עצבנים, ואז RPG לדלת, כניסה. דלת מתעופפת, אני גם ישר מתעשת, מבין מה קורה, תפסתי שם ליד המסדרון גם כן איזה פינה להסתתר. נכנסו פנימה, אני תפסתי זיג בין השירותים שם למסדרון, ובעצם כל פעם שבאו להיכנס למסדרון, הם היו פותחים בירי בלי הפסקה, ללא הבחנה, אני הייתי מחכה, מישהו היה נכנס, ירייה 1 או 2, פוצע, מפיל. וככה התנהלנו איזה 1.5 שעה, ירי לא פוסק.
למיקי ברור שמחבלי חמאס ידעו בדיוק לאן הם באים, לאיזה שכונה בקיבוץ ולאיזה בית. הם חיפשו אותו, רצו לקחת אותו בשבי.
הם רצו שאני יחנה והם יקחו אותי. זו הייתה בעצם המטרה שלהם.
אתה שומע את זה?
אני עכשיו מבין את זה, כן.
אחרת הם היו...
כן.
משמידים את הבית.
משמידים את הבית. היו אפילו פעמיים שהגיעו אלינו השכנה, שהייתה בת ערובה שלהם. הביאו את האמא בכתה, ואמרה לי שאני יחנה ושאני אצא, ואם אני לא אצא ירגו פה את כולם. ואז הביאו את הילדה שלה. הילדה שלה אמרה לי גם כן, אותו דבר, בבקשה תצא, ואז אחרי 2-3 שניות התחילה לבכות, אמרה לי, סליחה, אל תצא, אני מצטערת, ילדה בת 10 או 12, בכי.
תוך כדי שהם מחזיקים אותה?
הם מחזיקים אותה, ואני שומע את הבכי שלה ואת ההיסטריה שלה. אני זוכר שאמרתי לה שאני אוהב אותה, וזהו, והם לקחו אותה.
אתה יודע מה עלה בגורלה?
הן חטופות, נהדרות. והיה עוד נער בן 16 שגם הגיע אלינו. אני גם כן הבנתי שם שאין לי מה לפתוח לו את הדלת כי הוא חלק מהם, ומסתבר שזה גם עוד מניפולציה שהם הפעילו שם על אנשים.
אין דילמה.
אין דילמה, וגם בדיעבד הילד הזה נרצח.
זאת תומר?
זה תומר.
וואו.
כן, זה תומר. לונה, בואי אליי. בואי יפה, בואי.
היא מפחדת.
היא מפחדת, היא רואה עכשיו חיילים, רואה אנשים, היא לא בטוחה. בואי.
זה מתוקה.
בואי כלבה טובה, בואי. נראה לי מפחד בעיקר הייתה צמודה אליי, לא יודע אם להגן עליי באותו רגע, היא הייתה מאחוריי, תשמור עליי. לא נראה לי...
לאורך כל השעות?
כן, תמיד, צמודה יותר מדי. והייתה פעם אחת שהם נכנסו עם הידיים ושנפתחה הדלת, ושם נתתי לה את הפקודה לתקוף, והיא לא תקפה. אני זוכר שהסתכלתי על העיניים שלה וראיתי כמה היא מבוהלת, והבנתי שאני צריך להמשיך להילחם וכאילו לעצור את הסכנות עכשיו, כי גם היא לא עוזרת לי.
היא הייתה אמורה לתקוף?
היא הייתה אמורה לתקוף.
אחרי שעות של לחימה בין מיקי למחבלים, מתחילה שם גם מלחמה פסיכולוגית, בעיקר עם אחד מהם, האיש שהוביל את מסע הרצח של חמאס בנחל עוז.
ואז הוא מודיע לי שהוא, אם אני עכשיו לא נכנע, הוא מפוצץ את כל הממד, לא יישאר פה אף אחד, לא אתה ולא אשתך ולא ילדה. מצאתי את הזמן הזה כן למשוך שם זמן, והתחלתי למשוך אותו בלשון. אמרתי לו שאני מוכן להיכנע, אני מוכן לצאת, רק אם הוא יבטיח לי שהוא לא יפגע באישה ובילדה. ואם כן, גם שייתן לי להתארגן, שאני קצת פצוע, שייתן לי לחבוש את עצמי, להתלבש קצת, להיפרד. התחלתי לשאול אותו כל מיני גם שאלות על האסלאם ועל הקוראן, למה אתם עושים דברים כאלה, הרי זה לא משהו שמצווה עליכם.
הוא עונה לך?
הוא עונה לי. הוא אומר לי שהם באסלאם הם לא הורגים לא נשים ולא ילדים, והם לא עושים דברים כאלה, באנגלית רהוטה, מדבר יפה, משכנע אותך גם לצאת, גם שהוא יטפל בך וייתן לך כוס מים, כי הוא יודע שאתה בלי מים.
אתה אומר שהוא מדובר בבחור אינטליגנטי שידע מה הוא עושה, נכון?
כל מילה שלו הוא יודע מה הוא אומר,
כאילו בא מוכן למשא ומתן?
כן, מאוד, מאוד. מישהו שמוכן לזה ומנהל את זה כמו שצריך. באיזשהו שלב הוא אמר לי, הוא צעק, אמר לי, נגמר לך הזמן, הפסקתי לדבר, עכשיו אני מפסיק לדבר איתך, ואני מתחיל לספור לאחור. אני למד לספור לאחור. ואז אני רואה, הוא עומד מול הדלת של הממ"ד, טיל כתף של RPG, ואני רואה אותו והכל, אתה רואה אותו עומד מולך, הוא מתחיל לספור. אני אומר לו, למה אתה סופר? הוא אומר לי, כי אם אתה לא תצא, אני יורה פנימה, וגומר עליכם. ואז התחיל לספור את השניות לאחור, אני זוכר שב-10 או ב-12 שניות אני צעקתי לו שיעצור, ואמרתי לו שאני נכנע ואני יוצא, אז הוא אמר לי, אני רוצה שתוצא עם ידיים למעלה, תשאיר את האקדח למטה, תפתח את הדלת, תיבט באקדח. אני מתחיל לשקשק בדלת, להראות סימנים שאני יוצא החוצה, ואז אני אומר לו, אבל אם אתה מבטיח לו לראות בי ובמשפחה שלי, אז תקיים גם אתה את מה שאתה הבטחת לי, תוריד את ה-RPG, למה אתה צריך לעמוד מולי עם RPG? השבריר שנייה הזאת שאומר לי, אתה צודק, הוא בא, אני זוכר שהוא מתחיל להוריד את זה, פשוט פתחתי את הדלת ורצתי והראיתי בו.
הסתערת?
הסתערתי עליו, ושם זה נגמר, שם זה נגמר.
אתה יודע להגיד לנו מול כמה נלחמת, מול כמה פגעת בסופו של דבר? אתה משחזר בטח לעצמך?
לדעתי פגעתי לפחות בין 10 ל-14 מחבלים.
כולם שהגיעו לתוך הבית שלך?
כן.
אז כמה היו בקיבוץ סך הכל אם רק אצלך התעודדו?
לדעתי היו 300 אם לא יותר, היו כמויות.
300 מהם? אתה מאמין ש300?
לפחות.
בעלי הוא גיבור גדול. הוא גיבור גדול, ומזל, אני קשה לי להגיד את זה. כי הרבה מהבתים, מהמשפחות, לא היה להם אקדח לשמור על עצמם או נשק. לנו היה מזל, אולי קצת גורל, אולי קצת שמירה, אני לא בן אדם מאמין, אבל אולי בכל זאת. אבל מה עם אלה שלא היה להם את זה? קשה לי קצת כרגע להגיד, וואו, ניצלנו, כי כל כך הרבה לא. גם השמחה היא לא שמחה על החיים עדיין. אנחנו יכולים להגיד קצת תודה, אבל זה קשה להגיד תודה שהכאב הוא בכל כך הרבה משפחות בארץ.
לא תחושה של גיבור, קשה לי, אתה יודע, זה עם חברים שצמודים שנהרגו ולא נמצאים איתי. אתה יודע, הגנתי על המשפחה שלי בסך הכל, אם הייתי יכול יותר. תחושות מעורבות.
חושב עליהם?
מאוד, הרבה, כל יום. זאת אומרת, אני יושב פה והם לא. אז זה קשה. קשה אפילו לאכול, אתה יודע, בזמן שאני יודע שאולי הם לא אוכלים או לא שותים.
בינתיים הם שוהים בקיבוץ כרמים, כל המשפחה, גם עופרי, ביתם הבכורה, שאיתה לא הצליחו ליצור קשר במשך כל השבת הנוראה ההיא. הם מנסים איכשהו להקל בכלל את מה שעברו בשבת השחורה. איך בעזרת אקדח גלוק הצליח מיקי לחסל, לפצוע או להדוף מביתו יותר מ10 מחבלים, חמושים מכף רגל ועד ראש.
אתה אמרת שאתה רוצה לחזור ללחימה גם מאיזה מניעים כל כך. הרי אתה יכול להישאר עכשיו לשמור על המשפחה שלך אחרי מה שעברת, אבל אתה רוצה לחזור כי?
קודם כל זה לתת תחושת ביטחון שאנחנו באים ונותנים יד. גם לאזור שלנו, וגם יש הרבה תחושה של רגשות של נקמה. ממש ככה, נקמה. פשוט להחזיר את הכבוד של היקירים שלנו שפשוט פשעו נגדם. פשוט ככה.
אי אפשר להתעלם מהרגש הזה כרגע, נכון? אי אפשר להתעלות מעל הרגש הזה כרגע. זה קיים?
זה קיים. הרגש הזה חזק, מבעבע.
רגש של מדינה שלמה לפי דעתי.
לגמרי.
תודה רבה.
תודה רבה.
כל מה שעשית. לא נתפס, כן?
לא נתפס, אבל נעשה.
It is an incredible story. Still with us in studio, our senior correspondent Owen Alterman. Joining us, Reserves IDF Major General Eitan Dangot, former military secretary to 3 defense ministers, former coordinator of government activities in the Palestinian territories. Just a word about that, Eitan. What an amazing story. One man with one gun, pistol, holding off for hours at least a dozen heavily armed terrorists.
As more as you listen to the stories, you cannot accept or understand the depth of this tragedy. And on the other hand, almost each event creates you heroes, from children to women to such a guy that fight for their life, that didn't give up at all, that made all they could do for their future. And that is something that is really gave us few aspects to look for the present and the future now. To believe that our goal is right. Secondly is not to give up and to stand behind what we declare. And the third, we own it to those who passed away in such tragedy, and for those who will come in the future, that the moment they open again their window in their places, they will not see any Hamas guy few hundred meters from them on the border, or any civilian from Gaza that moved from the fence and helped to murder them. And it's something Israel that from 7th of October should adopt a different principle for its future existence. We own it to those who passed away, and we own it to our future generations.
All right, that's, I think, well said. And we heard it from that amazing man that he was ready to go back into battle. I want to go back to a discussion we had early in the studio. We did hear the IDF spokesperson, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, say this evening, talking about the issue of the humanitarian aid that is going in, that the IDF, that the Israeli government is allowed to go in. But it, for example, drew a line on the fuel, the import of fuel, despite the fact there are calls, certainly from within Gaza, and certainly even in the international community, saying, well, the hospitals will run out of fuel. He's saying Hamas has fuel. And the IDF has put out photographs of fuel, gasoline storage facilities that Hamas has. You've dealt with these issues with your work with COGAT, the agency that deals with the civilian population there.
Yes, I can speak about it, but with the different principles.
Okay.
When I was on duty as a COGAT, we didn't face and we didn't imagine that we will face such murder and massacre as happened on the 7th of October. I think that I myself was the first one in 2010 to change the humanitarian policy in Gaza. I convinced Bibi Netanyahu and Ehud Barak that time to try to bring Gaza and to adopt something that we did, of course, in West Bank, that economy is security, and lets us make the best efforts for the civilians that are living in Gaza. And we created project, and we added water that come from Israel, and we have plans. You know that if Gaza would adopt or take for its needs for the infrastructure and structure, even 30% for what they were put in invest in Gaza in money, it would bring Gaza to a different way today. But all the time, all the years, till the 7th of October, the most of the money was taken for Hamas to build its forces. It was really something that cheated Israel it was planned and was taken out by Qatar, because Qatar brought money in order to give the population. On the other hand, Qatar gave billions of dollars to create such murder machine inside Gaza. And now, the humanitarian area wasn't immediately stated by Israel that it will be a closure, nothing will be given. Then came the United States President, the relations with Egypt, and then we agreed to open a corridor of humanitarian from Rafah crossing inside Gaza, but besides one condition: fuel is the fuel for the terrorism. I support this decision not to allow any drop of fuel to enter to Gaza. Why? If you would listen today to the 85 years woman, which was released yesterday, and she explained you where she was taken underground. And you can imagine there is another country underground in Gaza that needs fuel, that has electricity, that has medical services, that had everything to live, and they are living there.
Right.
It means I cannot be the judge of the world why babies was murdering with a knife, while babies was killed, while elders was taken, and now I will say I'm going to help to the civilians as it was nothing happened. No. 30,000 liters of fuel was taken from UNRWA, and that's something that could serve all the hospitals in Gaza, especially with generators. So I think that as we are on a stage, that we are making a big pressure on Hamas, and there is water, food, and the other kind of things in Gaza, we cannot supply the oxygen that Hamas needs for its future defending itself, while for the next step that is coming, or to the strikes, they are under strikes and have heavy life inside the underground tunnels. We need it, and I support this kind of policy.
I just want to say we'll come back to you, Owen, because there is a bit of information that was released by the IDF just today. The Shin Bet, Israel Security Agency, and the IDF, following the October 7th attack, managed to locate a phone belonging to one of the murdered women that was then used by one of the terrorists. And on it was a recorded conversation between the terrorist and his family in the Gaza Strip, in which he brags about how proud he is of the massacre he carried out against the Jews. Now, this recording was released for the first time just this evening at that UN Security Council meeting we saw earlier. Let's take a listen.
Hello. يابا ابا انا قاعد بكلمك من جوبا بسيم. افتح الواتس تبعه قول له وين، شوف كيف القتله، شوف كيف قتلت بايدي يابا، ابنك قتل يهود، هاي دخل مفلسين يابا. الله اكبر، ربنا يحميك يا رب، ربنا يحميك يابا، ربنا يحميك يابا. قاعد بكلمك من جوال يهوديه قتلتها وقتلت جوزها، 10 بايدي يابا قتلت 10. الله يابا 10 بايدي قتلت. يابا افتح الواتس شوف كيف قتلت يابا. افتح بتدفع عليك واتس قول له وين بروح. ربنا يروح بالسلامة يا رب. يابا جوبا بسيم يابا. يابا والله 10 قتلت. 10 بيدي يابا. يابا على ايدي، اعطينا امي اعطينا امي. يما يما يسميك يما. طول الليل 10 بيدي يما. طول كمان 10 يما بيدي قتلت. طول الليل ادعي لك يما. طول الليل ادعي لك. ربنا يرحمك بالسلامة يما. افتح الواتس يابا بعمل لك تبث مباشر من جوا، افتح. شايلك يما، طول الليل تدولني معاك. يما ربنا يحميك تفضل يما. اقتلك. ربنا يحميك يما، خذ يما ربنا يحميك. محمود يابا. محمود انت وين؟ انا جوا بفلسطين علاء. جوا قتلت 10 يا علاء. 10 بيدي، قاعد بكلمك من جوال يهودية. قتلت 10؟ قتلت 10 والله. وانت بزكيم؟ انا في سكيم مو في سكيم. عبد الله صوت الكاري. انا اول صخرة بدأت صوت الله عز وجل. انا اقول سوي 4 راسك يابا فوق. 4 راسك يابا. انت في نص السكاري جوا انت؟ جوا على المدينة. في النص السكاري جوا. افتح الواتس شوف كيف.
Eitan, we have talked here for many years over the incitement, the indoctrination of young Palestinians to carry out and to inspire them and enable them to carry out these kind of brutal attacks against women, the elderly, young children, babies in the most brutal manner. And I think that phone call, we see the mentality there that enabled them to do that.
Yes, I think that we have to understand that besides Hamas, Gaza is the state of Hamas. Gaza is adopted the principles of this cruel organization, and I look at them as a state of murderers. Why? Who is this guy? This guy is something between 20 to 30 probably, and you are dealing with this generation till the age of 30 that was brought up or educated under Hamas entity. From 2007, it's almost 20 years. Look, children were born before a little bit and after. Hamas has changed its face. And I'm not accept anything. The population, it's a part for these criminal and murderers. And if I will come, it was sound at the United Nations facilities, I think, by our ambassador there. And when you listen to the speech of the United Nations Secretary General, this guy came from Portugal, was the head of the refugees. What would you accept with such a place from the head of the world, while above him standing a guy that is not worth a word when he say, I can understand more or less in my words, understand Hamas because they are under 57 years of occupation. This is the answer to organization with murdered children, and then come the guy who took the key to be the Secretary General of the United Nations from Portugal, was Prime Minister, was the head of the refugees branch in the United Nations. This is anti-Semitic. He is talking like a criminal. He should be punished by the states of the United Nations that have to stop his work. This is a message to the world that all this place, it's a big lie.
Okay, I mean, of course, the United Nations is not going to punish him. That's the kind of talk.
I'm talking as I accept as a...
But there will be repercussions for him, and maybe not just from Israel. Let's see.
Okay. Explain that, Owen.
Listen, I wonder how this is going to be. The State Department's going to be asked about this at their next briefing.
Are coming here one after the other, leaders from all the EU. Sure. EU is not going, I cannot point of them as the best friend of Israel concerning, but after what happened, the EU bloc with the United Nations should stand strongly, not even in this region, in the United Nations, and say to this guy, you are not have even the right to be in your place anymore.
But how likely is that to happen, Owen?
Look, I don't think he's going to have to resign. He's going to be persona non grata in Israel. And as I said earlier on in the broadcast, across the political spectrum, right? And I think Eitan's words give voice to that. I actually think the impact of a tape like that, though, is much, much deeper. The two-state solution, how is an Israeli family raising children supposed to conceive of a state on the other side of the border? There's a critical mass of people who think that way.
We are going out for a brief break. We'll be back in 3 minutes. Please, gentlemen, Eitan, Owen, stay with us. Lots more coming up.
Made for Me, a unique concept in Israel. Custom-made men's fashion to your measurements. Made for Me, designer of all your events. Schedule your appointment at www.madeforme.co.il. Made for Me, official dresser of I-24 News.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
Comencé a trabajar en I-24 News en el año 2013. Ese mismo año, como parte de la serie de documentales Reportage Insight, viajé a la Argentina para entrevistar al fiscal Alberto Nisman, que había determinado inconstitucional el memorándum de entendimiento entre Argentina e Irán firmado por la expresidenta Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. Estaba relacionado con el atentado a la AMIA de 1994, que dejó un saldo de 85 muertos y más de 100 heridos.
Todo el material con el que trabajamos a diario.
El 18 de enero del año 2015 ocurre un suceso impactante. El fiscal Alberto Nisman es encontrado muerto en el baño de su departamento con un tiro en la cabeza. Y lo que todo el mundo se preguntaba, ¿fue un suicidio o un homicidio? La Corte Suprema Argentina dictaminó que fue un asesinato.
La única solución es hacer como el Mossad hizo con Eichmann, traerlos acá y una vez que están libres.
¿Qué hay detrás de esta historia tan interesante? Encubrimiento a terroristas, conspiraciones internacionales, búsqueda de la verdad. ¿Algún día sabremos la verdad? En los últimos 7 años, para el magazine News 24 en español, que se transmite en I24 News, realicé más de 40 informes relacionados con el tema Amia Nisman Irán. Un tema que tiene todos los condimentos para que un canal internacional de noticias como I24 News siga investigando hasta que algún día se esclarezca la verdad.
Well, welcome back to this special broadcast on I-24 News. And Owen, I want to let you finish your point. We're talking about the diplomacy surrounding Israel's current situation, its conflict with Hamas. We saw at the UN, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, getting slammed by Foreign Minister Eli Cohen for the way he's framing the conflict. And that attitude's so different from, for example, the words we heard today from French President Emmanuel Macron visiting here in Israel.
Yeah, you're right, Caleb. Guterres, we spoke about. Macron, I'll get to in a minute, and those are the stories of the hour. But I think we can't lose sight of something a lot deeper. Every leader who has come here, I think without exception, and certainly including Macron, has basically said on the other side of the war, and Macron said we need a real relaunch of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. It's easy for him to say. And I think that really across the political spectrum, I can't emphasize this enough, across large parts of the Israeli political spectrum, I think someone raising children in this country, after listening to that tape from that Hamas murder on October 7th, which we just played, is going to have a very hard time conceiving of a two-state solution. Because what is a two-state solution? There's an Israeli state on one side, and there's a sovereign state with all of the powers of the sovereign state on the other side. And I'm the last person to say that there are 2 million people in Gaza who agree with and all identify with what that man said. By no means. But I think it's a safe assumption that there's at least a critical mass of people in Gaza, and maybe in the West Bank too, who do identify with him, at least in concentric circles, right? Not everyone is going to do what he did, but many, many more people will support it and agree with the sentiment. And I think we have to ask real tough questions. And anyone saying that to themselves, especially in a position of power, has to get inside the head of an Israeli parent. And think how that Israeli parent processes this situation and is ready for a two-state solution, or for that matter, the one-state solution that's talked about, right? The single state with the equality.
Right.
I think you have to really think hard about that. And I think there have to be some real tough questions to be asked. Now to turn to Emmanuel Macron, who did speak to that, and all of that applies to what he said, but he said something that's, I think, more interesting and more important, and I think we played it earlier on, suggesting this idea of an international coalition to fight Hamas, right? Modeled on, or maybe taken as is, the coalition that fought ISIS. Essentially taking to its logical conclusion, right, the whole Israeli campaign over the last few weeks that Hamas is ISIS, right? Well, if Hamas is ISIS, let's fight Hamas the way ISIS was fought with the Grand Coalition. It's an interesting idea, and in Israeli terms, an out-of-the-box idea. It flies against the face of a century of national security doctrine in Israel and in pre-state Israel, right? The whole line, Israel will defend itself by itself, has become such a cliche that when we all tick it off our mental bingo cards when Netanyahu is speaking, it doesn't even register to us because it's such a part of the Israeli DNA, if you will. And this really flies in the face of it. And it's one of many signals that have really flown in the face of Israel's national security doctrine, right? The fact there are 2 U.S. aircraft carrier strike groups parked outside. Sure. Well, if Israel's defending itself, why are they there, right? And the reported babysitting by the American military coming in to help planning the ground campaigns.
There is U.S. military personnel sent here to assist in some way with intelligence gathering and even planning of the ground invasion.
Exactly. And just to finish the thought, this undermines or really flies in the face of decades, if not a century, of Israel's national security doctrine. It really brings into question after the war if that doctrine holds up.
Let me just ask you, how comfortable are you with the deepening? Certainly Israel welcomes the support, but the way in the fact that it always comes with a price, and U.S. military personnel here in Israel on the ground helping out in some ways along with those naval forces.
First of all, I'm trust, and I know from the past our independence way of planning, reacting, sharing intelligence information, etc. We have to understand that after Israel joined to the CENTCOM, it's
Central Command, which covers the Middle East.
Which is on the other part, not in Europe.
Right, it covers the Middle East.
We are talking about the burning area around us, next to Iran, very close to the Arab modern country that connected to Abraham Agreement, and everything is understood under the interest, and United States doesn't leave the area. I think that to see the United States is because one thing, USA understands that this conflict, this war in the north can take her to a regional conflict that will involve Russia, China interest, Iran, of course, Arab modern country, etc. I think this is the main reason on a very clear and right way of assess that has been done together with the United States. If they are sending some people to share it information, from my point of view, it's okay. But I'm still not the IDF. We are still very, very independent, even too much about it, and have all the freedom to decide what to do, how to do, and when to do. So I prefer such way of cooperation and coordination, because you have a sign also what happened with Yemen, with the Houthis, with the launching of the missiles and the UAV that were on the way to the south
and
of
were intercepted
Israel.
by
another piece of evidence for my theory. Interesting, I forgot
you
that.
See what is the meaning that we are in a regional conflict?
Well, just very relevant to that, just this evening, the Pentagon made a statement saying that since October 7th, U.S. troops have been attacked at least 10 times in Iraq and at least 3 times in Syria. So clearly the U.S. Itself feels that they are part of this wider regional conflict.
And this is another thing, Caleb, that Iran is standing behind this regional plan that was planned very detailed to use Hamas as a proxy in the south, preparing in the north, and using it with Shiite militias to attack United States. It's a regional attack that well organized and carried and leading by Iran.
Well, but at the end of the day, Kalev, I at least don't think that these attacks and U.S. troops are going to do anything to deter the United States in the moment of truth.
Of course not.
There's just not much leverage the Iranians ultimately have against the 2 aircraft carriers.
Owen, there is another element that you've looked at today. There was a reporting in the Washington Post that U.S. officials are drawing up, I guess you can call them doomsday plans, to evacuate hundreds of thousands of Americans from Israel and Lebanon in the case of, we're looking at a kind of regional war. So our correspondent Owen Alterman looks at these attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria that I just mentioned. We have the hard numbers now, and how they fit into this bigger picture.
The contest for America's role in the Middle East may be joined here, on the border between Israel and Lebanon, where each day brings the risk of wider war. A war that could bring in American fighter planes. A war that could lead to even more targeting of American troops.
We are concerned about an increase in attacks by Iranian proxies in the region, whether they be targeting U.S. interests or whether they be targeting other interests in the region. We hold Iran accountable for those attacks.
Those attacks include attacks by Iranian allied militias on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. A warning by Iran of what could happen should the United States enter a war, full scale.
What we're seeing is the prospect of a significant escalation of attacks on our troops and our people throughout the region.
U.S. interests in the Middle East, of course, go far beyond the militia attacks, as this war has taken on not only regional but global stakes of stopping radical Islam, of proving commitment to allies. And so these pictures from Norfolk, Virginia a few days ago. Sailors setting out in their aircraft carrier strike group, fulfilling the mission given by U.S. President Joe Biden in the opening days of the war. 2 aircraft carrier strike groups will be positioned in the eastern Mediterranean. And Iran knows it, making clear the real balance of power.
And another update coming out of Washington that's certainly relevant to all of these issues. White House stating that U.S. President Joe Biden spoke this evening with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, coordinating him, reaffirming that the U.S. supports Israel's right to defend itself. And we have seen the public statements, at least by the Saudis, condemning Israel's attack operations in Gaza, raising the issue of the civilians. The Saudis pledging $100 million in aid to the civilians of Gaza, and Biden saying that. The irony, of course, here, the irony, I would say, of Saudi Arabia initially, and maybe doing it because because of concerns about public opinion in the Arab world, condemning the Israel response to Hamas attacks, is Hamas openly admitted that one of its motivations for launching this attack now was to torpedo the possibility of a normalization of ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it's awkward. By the way, the Saudi readout of this call could be absolutely fascinating.
Yes,
and I think we want to exactly to see how what their version of what this call was could be absolutely fascinating. Look, the idea again, what the post-war scenarios for Gaza are going to look like are still so up in the air. But the idea of Saudi money coming in to Gaza strikes me as a potentially constructive step from Israel's perspective. Again, maybe displacing Qatar in a way, but again, there's so many wild cards.
I would like to add that we just spoke about the attack on USA forces in some places among the Iraq and in Syria.
Yes.
The USA didn't react to this attack till now, and they know exactly who attacked them. It means that the balance in the area is still keeping by the USA not to escalate. Secondly, when you are talking about the...
Well, let's be clear. Let's name the force behind those attacks, which is Iran. And clearly the Biden administration...
Of course.
The Biden administration is still, on one hand, acting to thwart Iranian proxies, but being very careful. President Biden keeps... while he keeps warning these other parties in the Middle East, being very careful, and he's been criticized for it, certainly by Republicans, not to specifically mention Iran.
Yes, that United States, meanwhile, decided to contain these attacks. And I believe that if it continues, you will see a reaction towards the local Shiite organizations, militias, and later on to Iran. Secondly, I agree a lot with the fact that moving ahead with Saudi Arabia towards a new agreement with the United States, with normalization with Israel, gave Iran a motivation and a backwind to push to move ahead this plan that was planned already for at least 1 or 2 years. And I point at May 21, when was here the last escalation inside Jerusalem with Hamas, that was recognized as a area escalation. I'm sure that at this point it was started by and motivated by Iran to move ahead to prevent and to stop this activity with Saudi Arabia. Iran felt very high recently concerning its achievements strategically with Russia in the Middle East, coming close towards Saudi Arabia, etc. Suddenly came the United States step or movement towards Saudi Arabia and create something new. Iran got panic and decided to move ahead its plan. And it's very clear now the division between the wing of Tehran and the wing of the moderate Arab countries, United States. Israel is also a result of it. So, and Israel is now in the front. And I think that the West world understand that lose of Israel or not complete its mission to destroy Hamas capacities, it will mean for them a red flag for their future and interest in the Middle East and in Europe as well.
All right, well, certainly one indication we've seen of Iranian proxies getting involved and trying to open up alternate fronts in this conflict with Hamas was just this evening when rockets apparently were fired from southern Syria into the into the Golan Heights. 2 rockets. Let's go to our Robert Swift, our correspondent in the north there, because we're talking, Robert, about the broadening out of this conflict in other fronts, dealing with Iranian proxies, and certainly that was an indication of even maybe another potential front there in the South Golan, in the southern Golan this evening.
Indeed, the fear there could be that the northern front could essentially expand eastwards onto the Syrian border. Now, this is not this is the scenario that obviously the IDF will have taken into consideration. They understand the fact that Hezbollah, as an ally to the Syrian government, connected through the Iranian government, they have to a degree a presence in Syria. So it will not come as a total shock that fire is emanating from there as it does from the Lebanese border. And the IDF will be prepared for that eventuality.
All right, Robert Swift there in the north. Thank you.
May I estimate that what happened in the Golan Heights was done by operatively or tactic by Shiite militias that well organized in the area of the southeast of Syria. And by the way, you see that even during the war, there are some attacks that are blamed Israel on Damascus airport, etc. It means Syria is fulfilled also in this kind of war, also a place while we can, not to be surprised that will be attacked by such Shiite militias in the southeast of Syria, on the meeting border between Israel, Jordan, and Syria as well.
I want to just shift from one Iranian proxy there in Syria all the way down to Yemen, because there was a statement by a Pentagon spokesman, very interesting, this evening. He's referring to those Houthi missiles fired from Yemen by the Houthi rebels, who of course are sponsored from and armed by Iran. Last week, in the direction of Israel, they were intercepted by U.S. in the Red Sea by U.S. naval forces. So a Pentagon spokesman this evening said that the Pentagon assessed that the cruise missiles fired last week by the Houthis had ranges in excess of 2,000 kilometers, which means that they could reach Israel, certainly could reach southern Israel, places like, for example, Elad or even Dimona.
Yeah, Israel's Channel 14 reporting a few hours ago that the assessment is the missiles were in fact headed toward Eilat.
Toward Eilat.
Speculation that they were headed either toward the port, which is a dual-use target, military and civilian, and also, Kalev, assessment they may have been headed toward the hotel area.
Where we should mention the propaganda thing, where many of the residents of the Gaza border area have been relocated, presumably to safety, to Eilat.
It's not a propaganda thing. They're living there because they had to evacuate their communities because people in their communities were murdered and taken hostage.
On the part of the Houthis.
Exactly.
To say no matter where you go, even if you're far away from the Gaza border area, even if you're at Israel's most distant point from it, you could still be a target.
That's right. And it apparently carried very heavy payloads, much more so than the rockets used by Hamas, for example, and could have led to a mass casualty event, again, potentially including civilians and potentially including civilians who are survivors of the massacres.
I would like to add 2 points shortly. Once, don't forget, it was a stop on the mid of the way by the United States sea forces that were deployed, but in Israel you have the same systems to defend the sky and all kind of threats, and I may estimate that Israel would succeed also to destroy them. But what is the symbol of this kind of thing we just spoke? Listen, from Eilat, in the most southern point in Israel state, till Metula, the north part of the Israeli state, around the Mediterranean, when you are coming to Gaza, there is a regional of terror surrounding us, well planned by Iran, and this is emphasized the fact that we are now fighting for our future a generation here in Israel. It is, I think, the most, beside Yom Kippur War, after the establishment of Israel 48, I think is the main point we arrived now that will ensure Our future exists here, and we have to fight for it. We have the capacities, and above all, we have the people who believe the right in their heart, in their head, and we will do it. It is very difficult, but besides the fact of Israel, this is a risk for the entities in Egypt, the entities in Jordan, and the entities in the Gulf countries.
All right, gentlemen, we are coming to the end of this particular broadcast. I want to bring it back to the issue of the hostages, because that is so crucial in the equation here. And of course, that in terms of the human suffering, almost unimaginable. How could, for example, one even imagine the pain of parents who have had their young children kidnapped into Gaza? Well, one of those is Mayan Zin, whose two young daughters, Daphna and Ella, were taken from kibbutz Nachal Oz by Hamas terrorists, who also killed their father, Mayan's ex-husband Noam. Now, Mayan made a painful visit to Nir Oz after the attack, and we join her in this report, which is adapted to I-24 News from Israel's Channel 12.
Come a little closer. Can I get out of the car? Right here's the house. Can you smell it? I have to go inside.
At the gate of kibbutz Nachal Oz, Ma'ayan, the mother of 15-year-old Daphna and 8-year-old Ella, tries to enter. She's trying to get an impression of what happened to them when they were kidnapped by Hamas into Gaza. Last week, she learned that the father of her daughters, her ex-husband, Noam Eliakim, was found dead after he was murdered by the terrorists who broke into their home on October 7th. His body was found a few hours after his wife and 17-year-old son were laid to rest, side by side.
I was in my home in the kibbutz. I woke up from rocket alert sirens. I then heard unusual gunshots, which were right outside my window. I immediately ran to the security room and called my mom. I said to her, "Mom, do you also hear gunshots? It sounds really close. Are there terrorists?" She told me, "No." And I said, "Mom, are you sure? I'm telling you, I can hear it. It's outside my window. They're here." We didn't understand what was happening.
Friends called me in the morning. They asked me how the situation was in the kibbutz, if everything was okay. It was about 8 in the morning. From that moment, I was on the phone non-stop with Mom and Noam and Tomer. Video calls, trying to see what was going on with them. I spoke to them until 10:30, and then it was all over. No one answered anymore. A few hours passed, and then I get a call. "Stav, there's a live feed from your mother's Facebook."
There is Israel in Nahal Oz, and Katab al-Qassam is here.
Their last hours were recorded in a video that is now part of the collective memory of the attack, the horrific use of cameras and Facebook live streams by the terrorists.
كل ما يقول لك الناس كلهم. Your neighbor. Where's your neighbor? Where's your neighbor? Tell me. You! Go out!
In an unprecedented act of cruelty, Hamas terrorists used 17-year-old Tomer to lure other families out of the security rooms and murdered them.
Hello!
Hello, open the door.
Open the door! I will not shoot! I will not shoot! Open the door or I will not shoot!
Open the door.
I will shoot! I will shoot now! Open the door!
I just want to get to Nachal Oz, to my daughter's room. I want to see my little daughter's teddy bear, the big girl's dressing table, to see where they sat in the video. Daphna, Noam, Dikla, Ella, Tomer. I want to get there, to the place from where my family was taken. They went to sleep at home and woke up in Gaza. What a nightmare, the place they should be safest for any person in the world. They were pulled out of their bed by terrorists, by the most brutal murderers, into hell, into horror.
Her daughters, Daphna and Ella, are among the only victims documented alive inside Gaza.
We miss them so much. It's hard for me to think that they're there. I don't know what's going on with them. If they're okay, what are they thinking? If they know anything at all.
I will cross oceans to reach them. Hamas messed with the wrong mother. My girls are my life.
On the way to Nahal Oz, we pass through the slaughter zones, the fields of death, and the place is still dangerous. We are stopped at the checkpoint. They fear fire of anti-tank missiles on the road. Even after the threat was removed, the soldiers received orders not to allow anyone through. The threat is too real.
Excuse me, is there any chance you will let me in?
Who are you?
I am the mother of Daphna and Ella, who were kidnapped in Gaza.
Wait a minute, please.
Finally, the gate opens.
המראות שכל כך היה חשוב לה שנתעד בלתי אפשריים.
But in front of the house, things get even more difficult. The soldier who assisted us wants to spare her the terrible sights and finds himself in a heartbreaking situation.
I'm begging, please, you have to let me in.
Mayan, I ask not. I beg of you, don't enter.
If it's hard for me, I'll turn my head. I'm a strong woman, really. If my daughter stood up to it, I will stand up to it too.
No. They did not see what I see now.
Most of the members of this kibbutz, which was infiltrated by more than 100 terrorists, are displaced from their homes and have yet to return.
You want me to bring your daughter's clothes?
Both Daphna's and Ella's, please.
She fought to bring them to the world. Now they are all she has left.
The whole world has to see what they did here. 2 little girls.
A mother's pain there. Just a little reporting out of from our senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, who is in the United Nations HQ right now. He says he's being told off record by the office of the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who was condemned by the Israeli Foreign Minister today, that the Guterres still intends to meet with some of the families of the Israelis who have been brought there, Israelis who have family members taken hostage into Gaza. So the Secretary General is still going to meet him. That should be quite an interesting meeting, I would say the least.
Yeah, no one's going to judge the families for making whatever decision they make, but I do think that not only official Israel, but large parts of unofficial Israel will not meet him.
Okay, Owen Alterman, Eitan Dango, thank you for joining us. We're going out, but of course our coverage will continue with a special edition of Strictly Security, I believe, coming up in a few minutes. Thank you for joining us on I-24 News.
Israel is officially in a state of war.
This is a very active scene, and we need to get in the car as we're talking.
More than 100 soldiers and civilians have been kidnapped.
Help us, we don't know what to do. We just don't know anything.
Entire families, including babies and children and elderly, were butchered in their beds.
Awaken the giant, and we are ready and we are strong.
Everyone is showing up. This is the unity.
and welcome to this special edition of Strictly Security. We're covering the operation going on, the war here in Israel. We'll be with you for the next hour and a half with all the events in the south, in the north, and obviously here in the studio, the story of the Israelis that were kidnapped to Gaza, those who were killed, and the army getting ready to fight within Gaza. Our headlines for this hour: on the 18th day of the war in Gaza, images of 85-year-old Yochevet Lifshitz and 80-year-old Nurit Cooper, two elderly Israeli hostages freed by Hamas, dominated the news cycle today, amplifying debate over Israel's ground operation and the question of the remaining hostages. Following last week's incident in which missiles from Yemen were fired towards Israel and intercepted by U.S. forces, we'll discuss the broader regional implications of this war and the possibility of a wider regional conflict. A new wave of Haredi volunteers will take their place inside the Israeli Defense Forces. Hundreds of ultra-Orthodox men are asking to join the IDF ranks after years of absence from mandatory military service. And we'll catch up with our beloved IDF troops deployed, equipped, and ready for the orders to drop in. Let's begin. So let's begin with what's going on in the north. We're joined by our correspondent Robert Swift. Robert, put up to date on the point of what's going on in there. Another delicate day. Rockets being fired from Lebanon. Israel attacking in Lebanon. Tell us everything we need to know.
So essentially there's two major security events taking place in the north today. The most recent of these, almost 2 hours ago, was two rockets that were fired into the southern Golan Heights area. And the reason that this is significant is because these emanated from Syria, as opposed to much of the rest of the fire, which has tended to come from the Lebanese side of the border. There are fears that this ties into the concerns about a broader escalation of the conflict onto additional zones. And the IDF have responded to this rocket fire, which landed in open areas, by firing back at the launch sites using artillery. Now, this was the smaller of the two events I want to talk about, with the first being an earlier event which took place further to the west on the northern border. This was quite a heavy exchange of fire between Hezbollah forces and Israeli forces on the Israeli-Lebanese border. This contact was triggered by Hezbollah firing anti-tank weapons at an Israeli base. Hezbollah is understood to have fired up to 7, 8, 9 anti-tank missiles, and to have backed this fire up with mortar fire. The Israeli military responded with heavy barrages of artillery, which lasted for 30-40 minutes, and also used a drone of its own to fire Hellfire missiles onto the Hezbollah units that were firing these weapon systems.
Robert, I want to ask you, the common word or the common thought in Israel is that Hezbollah is not interested in fighting currently Israel in a full-scale war, but it's trying to keep Israel busy and to pay support to what's going on in Gaza, to his Hamas brothers in Gaza, as much as we can refer to Sunnis and Shiites as brothers, but we leave it aside currently. How do we know that those assessments are correct? Because we were surprised on October 7th in Gaza. How do we know we won't be surprised from the Lebanese border within a week or two when Israel is deeply involved or deployed in Gaza?
Essentially, you can never be sure with these things. That is the nasty truth behind intelligence. It's always just an assessment. But one of the main reasons that is the current thinking is because the best moment for Hezbollah to attack, if it were to have attacked, was at the same time as Hamas. The fact that they did not attack at that points to some degree to the fact that maybe Hezbollah doesn't want to be too much involved in this fight. And there are key reasons for them to attack Israel currently without going beyond a certain threshold. If they can put, if they can continue skirmishes as we've seen, even escalating these slightly, if they can do this, not only does it demonstrate their support for the Hamas cause, but it also ties in Israeli forces that could otherwise be down in the south.
Robert, thanks so much for all the hard work you're doing up north, and keep yourself safe. Thank you very much. The United States is well into preparations for a wider war in the Middle East, with Washington Post reporting officials are drawing up doomsday plans to evacuate hundreds of thousands of Americans from both Israel and Lebanon. Senior diplomatic correspondent Owen Alterman looks at another development: attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, and how those fit into the bigger picture.
The contest for America's role in the Middle East may be joined here, on the border between Israel and Lebanon, where each day brings the risk of wider war, a war that could bring in American fighter planes, a war that could lead to even more targeting of American troops.
We are concerned about an increase in attacks by Iranian proxies in the region, whether they be targeting U.S. interests or whether they be targeting other interests in the region. We hold Iran accountable for those attacks.
Those attacks include attacks by Iranian allied militias on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, a warning by Iran of what could happen should the United States enter a war, full scale.
What we're seeing is the prospect of a significant escalation of attacks on our troops and our people throughout the region.
U.S. interests in the Middle East, of course, go far beyond the militia attacks, as this war has taken on not only regional but global stakes of stopping radical Islam, of proving commitment to allies. And so these pictures from Norfolk, Virginia a few days ago. Sailors setting out in their aircraft carrier strike group, fulfilling the mission given by U.S. President Joe Biden in the opening days of the war. 2 aircraft carrier strike groups will be positioned in the eastern Mediterranean, and Iran knows it, making clear the real balance of power.
Onto the southern front and the planned ground operation by the IDF in Gaza. I'd like to bring in our guests for this evening, Reserve IDF Colonel Doron Avital, former commander of Sayot Matkal Special Forces, and by Zoom joins us Yaakov Peri, former head of Israeli Shin Bet. Thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us today. Peri, I'd like to start with you, looking at Gaza, which you know very well from your days at the Shin Bet and ever since, serving in the Israeli government and Knesset. How difficult will it be for Israel to achieve the goal that the government set, to bring down Hamas, both militarily and as the ruler of Gaza?
Well, it's not going to be a easy work. It is quite complicated, and that's one of the reasons we are not coming in night or the day before that tonight. We have to prepare the ground, and the Israeli Air Force is doing a fantastic job in order to clean as much as it can the ground by bombing individuals, headquarters, offices, and others installations. The ground force will have to fight street by street, tunnel by tunnel, knowing that the headquarters of the forces, the Hamas forces in Gaza, are hiding tunnels under the city. So it's not going to be an easy task, but we can do it, and we have to win. We have to eliminate this barbarian terror organization in order to let, again, our people to come back to their kibbutz and settlements near the Gaza border.
Doron Avital here with me in the studio. So you heard Peri, we have to do it. We have to use ground forces because you can't win from the air, especially when Hamas is deep in the tunnels. We've heard one of the from the ladies who was released today saying that she was dragged within the tunnels for kilometers. How difficult is going to be? How complicated job is, and how doable is the mission?
I think a ground offensive is a challenge that we didn't meet in the last, I'm not sure how long, and when I go even backward to Beirut, and I'm a veteran of the Lebanon war, I think the mission here is, though it's within our perimeter, very close to us, it's a very high task. We're talking of terrible infrastructure underground, and it is going to be a big challenge. And to complicate things even further, of course, we have the hostage dilemma. Of course, even if we go to ground offensive and there are still hostages, there would be special forces in tandem with the division and brigades trying to locate in different localities and locate those hostages. But it's, as it is, this is one of the hardest task the Israeli IDF ever encountered.
So I'll get back to you, to Yaakov Peri in a second, but I want to join in our defense correspondent, Jonathan Regev, joining us from the south. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening, Yoav.
So let's begin with the incident that took place a couple of hours ago near the kibbutz of Zikim, terrorists coming from Gaza by sea. A fight over there. Some of them were killed, others escaped. Give us the details, please.
Yes, so first we're on the beach of Ashkelon, the marina of Ashkelon, a beautiful marina. At this time of the year should be full of people, but of course it's empty. Zikim is about 5 miles to the south of us, and we see flares in the air every once in a while over there in the distance. As far as we understand, at least officially, this incident is not over yet. We've heard, and there maybe you can see these are flares in the air, meaning there's still search going on. Flares, of course, meant to lit the sky, especially in the night, of course, when it's dark. We see these flares in the air. That's where Zikim is located, as we said, roughly 5 miles to the south of us. As far as we understood, up to 9 terrorists were able to get close to the Israeli shore in Zikim. Zikim, a site of an Israeli community and a base also, one of the places where terrorists infiltrated in that terrible morning of October 7th. As far as we understand, up to 9 terrorists tried to get close to the beach, tried to infiltrate into Israel. Some of them were killed, possibly all of them. We do not know. We do not have official confirmation at this time. But this shows that even after 2.5 weeks of constant pounding of Gaza, Hamas still has abilities. There are still elite units trying to infiltrate into Israel through the sea. That's not something for amateurs. These are professionals. They knew what they were doing. Were they all killed? Were some of them caught? We do not know. We're waiting for confirmation from the army. And at least for now, and at least officially, this incident is not over yet.
Jonathan, on the bigger scale, you've been traveling as we speak. We have another terror alert not far from you about terrorists trying to enter Israel. So keep safe and look for that. But on the bigger picture, you've been visiting the forces. How the preparedness of them, the readiness to get inside Gaza?
The forces are ready. The army is ready, and they said it loud and clear. Even the chief of staff, Herzi Halevi, said today, we are ready. The army is ready. The plans are ready. Now it's time for the political leadership to give the order, which is not given yet. It's perhaps also some kind of an answer to some politicians who said maybe the army has to be better prepared. So no, according to the chief of staff and according to the forces that we've been meeting, they are ready. They're willing to go in. Now it's time for the political leadership, which at least until now has not made the decision. Maybe maybe they're thinking that it's better to pound from the air, and we do know that it is. It is taking a certain price from Hamas. But if you want to eradicate Hamas altogether, as was promised by so many people up in the political echelon, if you want to eradicate them all together, that cannot be done from the air.
Yes, and as we said, there is a new alert about possible terror attack on the kibbutz of Zikim, which you've mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So, Jonathan, if you have any more details, feel free to rejoin us. Thank you very much. I get back to you, Doron Avital. You've mentioned the issue of hostages, 220, which is a huge number. Hamas, has been releasing a couple yesterday, a couple at the weekend. It can play with us and with the West forever.
Exactly. I think the Hamas plays his hand very cleverly, and we have to really to acknowledge this and know how to handle it, because it seemed that every time we were thinking of the ground offensive, we have to postpone it in some context. Yesterday they talked about 50 hostages being released. In the end, there were only 2. So it's an ongoing process. And also we have the problem within the Israeli public in terms of this dilemma. So, yeah.
Yaakov Perry, I want to talk to you about that issue of the hostages. You've been in charge of that issue for the Israeli government at the end of the 90s. You know the issue.
1995 till 2000.
Yes, exactly. And at the time, the main issue was vis-a-vis Hezbollah, with which you've negotiated a deal. The prime minister was the same prime minister at most of the time, Benjamin Netanyahu. Put us behind the scenes. How doable it is to reach a deal, if at all, bearing in mind that we're in a war and the army is prepared to go fighting in Gaza?
You're absolutely right, Yoav, because it's a complicated issue. First of all, we are not talking directly with the Hamas. We are using middlemen, and in this case, it's Qatar and Egypt, and it's not an easy task not to talk directly. Secondly, we understand that the Hamas is playing these tricks. As Doron mentioned, they are making all kinds of manipulation by releasing 2 hostages, and after 2 or 3 days, they are demanding more supplies or more humanitarian aid, and releasing another 2. And we will not be able to wait for long. We want to make a deal, bring back all the hostages, or at least a big part of them, and Hamas will charge a high price for releasing them, a price that I suppose that Israel will be ready to pay when the demand will come. So,
but Yaakov, I want to ask you on that. Why should Hamas go for such a deal, knowing that once the deal is brokered, the next thing Israel will do is attack Gaza? So it can keep the hostages as a bulletproof vest.
Absolutely. Hamas wants to delay the ground attack, and by releasing small drops of the hostages, Hamas thinks that it will prevent or at least delay the ground attack. And it's a dilemma, because the families of the hostages are trying to convince the political arena that it's not safe to go in while we have 220 hostages in the Gaza city. And there are other voices that are asking Israel to go in to finalize the I'm calling the job to eliminate the Hamas. So it's a very big dilemma. And you have to add to it that also the United States is taking a position trying to convince Israel not to hurry, or at least even not to go for a ground operation. So the political circles have to make a very, very difficult decision. I'm sure that the decision will be go in to finalize the job in eliminating the Hamas, taking into consideration the fact that we will have still hostages on the ground.
Yes, so I want to ask you, Doron, there is this dispute in Israel that Yaakov Perry mentioned. Should Israel wait and keep on pounding Gaza from the air and try to release as many hostages as possible, or go in using, the huge support that Israel gets from within, obviously, and from without? We've heard world leaders, even Macron today saying, fight them, don't expand the war, but fight them, kill them, we're behind you.
I think it's a dilemma, and I wouldn't want to give a verdict here instead of the decision makers, because then I would have to see the maps, to see the intel, to see what we have in our hands. Because also the operation as it is, this ground offensive is a very tricky operation, okay? So I hope, and I feel that the IDF does have the right plan, the most creative plan possible, because we have to be creative here. Gaza have a few fronts, not only land fronts, and we have to think how to do it, and whether we could, based on the intelligence we have, and we appointed Nitzan Alon, a very qualified general, maybe one of the best generals we had in special forces. It was a deputy of mine, to this task. And if we could do a ground offensive that does take into account the possibility of, on the ground, releasing hostages in those localities, then this is a fair chance, and I would go for this operation. But we have to really weigh it seriously. And I hope the decision-making are opening maps and not discussing it on panel.
Yes, of course. Yaakov, I go back to you. You were head of the Shin Bet of the Israeli Secret Service at the times when the Oslo Accord was signed exactly 30 years ago. What happened to the Gaza Strip? What happened to the Palestinians? How come our dreams or I don't know, our wish to go for peace with the Palestinians and to make this area of the world a safe haven became some kind of an inferno, with Hamas becoming worse than ISIS. I've visited there quite a few times in the past 2.5 weeks. I've seen scenes and I've heard stories that are unimaginable. What happened to them? How did they become such a monster?
Went wrong. Our idea that there will come a time be able either to speak to or to live side by side with this organization failed completely. It's a intelligence failure, a operational failure, and a technological failure. And we have to study from the beginning our thoughts and to check again all the intelligence we have gathered for years. They came out that we were wrong by thinking that the Hamas is not interested in a war or what they are doing is all kinds of maneuvers. It happens to be that the maneuver became a reality. They slaughtered, raped, burned, the worst and ugliest way you can even not imagine a whole population, and they have done it without interfering. The army wasn't there, the intelligence wasn't there, and they were free for hours till the first forces, the Israeli army, came into the ground. So we will have to sit on that and to understand what happened. And my idea is that we had the intelligence, but we didn't read it the right way. It should have been read it.
Yes, Doron, you agree with that?
I would say this is, of course, a failure in a magnitude unimaginable. Everybody understands it. Absolutely. A setback intelligence-wise and in every other, also tactical forces, organization, everything. But of course, it's every mistake like this sits on some bigger picture. And in the bigger picture, let's first understand that in the last year we were preoccupied with the West Bank, northern Samaria. The whole attention was there. And in general, in the last 15 years, I think, instead of like working out with our alliances vis-a-vis Iran and the nuclear deal, we were trying to play it on by ourselves. So when you try to play it on by yourself against a mighty empire with strength, we have to admit, like Iran, without your alliance that now you call in, then your attention in your backyard is loosening up. So I think we have to really learn this gap between the way we consider ourselves as a single empire fighting the Iranian empire and now fighting in our
And furthermore, as you both touched, you and Yaakov Peri, we were getting prepared to fight the big empire of Iran.
Exactly.
We were surprised deeply, hugely by the weakest force in the area. I'm sure that Hezbollah and Iran are looking at it and they're amazed as well.
I think they're in shock. I think they didn't imagine such a success. And also this is one of the things that we have to gain back in the ground offensive. We have to show that the might of the Israeli army.
The deterrence. Deterrence is a very tricky thing.
I think not only our enemies, also our allies are in shock. The U.S. and the Europeans, they were thinking differently. We have to gain back this.
And furthermore, Doron, our friends in the area.
Of course.
And I want you, Yaakov Peri, to comment on that because the Middle East currently is being cut into two. The Iranian forces, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and our forces, the good ones, the Gulf countries, Egypt, Jordan, and others who look at what's going on. And I'm sure they speak outside in favor of the Palestinians, but they pray for Israel to win because they're next.
Well, we are in another ballgame. And we'll have to study the whole issue from the beginning. And the truth is that in order to release the hostages, you have to use Qatar, which is a multi-Islamic country, Egypt, and the other states, which are not considered to be the best friends of Israel.
Yes.
Because we are not talking directly with the Hamas. Our mediators, Qatari and Egyptian, and others, they understand what is radical Islam.
Yes, Yaakov Peri, we will thank you for that. Doron Avital, thank you as well. A short break, we come.
Israel is at war. Make an investment in Israel bonds. It is the most powerful and direct way to stand with Israel. Visit israelbonds.com and invest now.
Over 1,300 people murdered and more than 3,000 injured, and the war with Hamas continues. We bring you first-hand testimonies from the front lines, from those who survived, and all the records of the atrocities by Hamas. Follow us as Israel fights terror from the south and north. Get the inside scoop on what's going on. Only on I-24 News.
This is a special edition of Strictly Security coming to you live here on I-24 News. Thank you for tuning in. We'll delve into the nuts and bolts of this unfolding drama in a moment, but first I'd like to turn to Israel's northern border once again and to our correspondent, Robert Swift. Robert, an update of yours on the situation over there up north.
Sure. So just a reminder of viewers that the major events taking place here in the north is two security incidents. One taking place in the Golan Heights, where two rockets were fired into communities to the east of the Sea of Galilee. This is a significant moment because it's fire that has come from Syria. The last time there was fire from across the Syrian border was about 2 weeks ago when there was mortar fire. And the Israeli military has responded to this fire with artillery strikes. Elsewhere, further to the west on the northern border, a few hours earlier, there was a fairly significant exchange of fire between the Israeli military and Hezbollah units. Hezbollah attacking an Israeli base using anti-tank weapons and mortar fire, and the Israeli military responding with a significant barrage of artillery of its own, as well as tank fire and fire from UAV, which was targeting the squads of Hezbollah fighters on the ground who are making use of those weapon systems.
Yes, and we hear reports of an Israeli attack in Syria. And obviously attacks in Lebanon, as you've mentioned. It seems like both borders are colliding with Israel. Do you feel or understand that what's going on in Syria is connected to what's going on in Lebanon?
Look, there's actors that operate within Lebanon that also operate within Syria and southern Syria. Hezbollah is one of those players, so it's entirely plausible that if they're going to be firing across the Lebanese border, they'll do the same from the Syrian border. The fact that that hasn't been as frequent, that fire is relatively rare compared to the fire emanating from Lebanon, will make some people hope that it isn't going to expand in that regard. But it's certainly something that the Israeli military has to be aware of, particularly due to the fact that there's the area in the north of around the Golan Heights and around the Kiryat Shmona, where the three borders come together quite tightly. It's an area where all three of these borders overlap almost.
Yes, Robert, thank you so much for this report. We move on. Even before Hamas's horrific October 7th terror attacks, there was significant concern regarding a looming regional conflict amplified by Iran and its proxies in the region. And since those deadly attacks, the option of the fighting spreading beyond the Gaza Strip and Israel's northern border has only increased. Middle East correspondent Ariel Oseran breaks down the different regional threats endangering Israel.
Hamas's surprise attack on October 7th took an unprecedented toll from Israel's southern communities, both in terms of scope and brutality. But it also threw Israel into a rapidly escalating downward spiral on its northern border and in the West Bank, with the potential of turning into a regional conflict. And then on Thursday, this happened.
The crew of the guided missile destroyer USS Carney, operating in the northern Red Sea earlier today, shot down 3 land attack cruise missiles and several drones that were launched by Houthi forces in Yemen. We cannot say for certain what these missiles and drones were targeting, but they were launched from Yemen, heading north along the Red Sea, potentially towards targets in Israel.
And so, from ballistic missiles in Iran to drones from Gaza, rockets from Lebanon, or cruise missiles from Yemen, Israel is perhaps the most threatened country in the world. So what exactly is Israel up against from its various potential and current enemies? Let's start with the most immediate threat, Gaza. Palestinian terror groups, mainly Hamas, have 50 to 60,000 trained fighters, 30,000 rockets and missiles, and dozens of attack drones. To the north, in Lebanon, there's Hezbollah, with 50 to 60,000 trained fighters, 150,000 rockets and missiles, and 2,000 attack drones. Pro-Iranian militias in Syria have dozens of drones, while in Iraq they hold dozens to hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones. The Houthis in Yemen, who've already thrown their towel in the fight, have hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones as well. And then there's the head of the octopus, Iran. Its national and paramilitary forces have over 3,000 ballistic missiles, some of which can reach Israel, and many thousands of attack drones.
We have warned everyone that this conflict can turn into a regional battle if the aggression, brutality, killings, ongoing bloodshed, and destruction against our people in Gaza persist.
So to zoom out for a wider look at the region and the main actors in this chess game, I sat down today with senior researcher Dr. Yoel Gojansky to get a sense of the bigger picture and the ways this local war can spread out. Here is our interview. Yoel Gojansky, thanks as always for joining us.
Thank you.
So we're looking at the situation here in Israel, in the Middle East, from the Israeli angle most of the time. And I want to use your expertise to look at it from the Gulf angle, the way the Saudis, the Qataris, the Iranians are looking at it. Probably in Tehran, everybody is very much happy of what's going on in Israel and around.
I will start with the Arab world. If you ask me to summarize how is the Middle East, the Arab Middle East is looking at this Israeli-Hamas war, I would summarize it in one word: contradictions. There's many contradictions in almost every aspect, and let's begin. In one way, the Arab world, the Sunni Arab world, what we call pragmatic, especially the Gulf states, have a deep interest for Israel to crush Hamas. They hide it, they don't say it out loud, of course, but in closed rooms, they would love the IDF to fight until the last Israeli soldier and to bring Hamas to its knees. On the other hand, they don't want to be seen as collaborators of Israel. Another contradiction, as much as they want to crush Hamas, they have to show sympathy to the Palestinians, and sometimes it goes hand in hand. As much as they want Israel to crush Hamas, and they also want Iran and its axis not to win or not to gain achievement from this war. However, they want also to preserve their relations with Iran. So there's so much contradictions in what the Arab world is doing right now.
So before we touch Iran itself, let's try to drill down. For example, let's take the Saudis, of which we've spoke here a couple of months ago. The Saudis keep it very open that they want Israel to win. Not because of our interests, but because of their interests, probably looking at, as you say, Iran and the extreme Sunni world and the rivals, even from Qatar, and they want them to lose.
Of course, all of the Arab Gulf states, minus Qatar, wants Israel to crush Hamas, because Hamas represent the Muslim Brotherhood ideology of political Islam, which is an enemy, a threat to those countries. They will not say it publicly. They will say it to me and to you in closed rooms. They want Israel to win. The problem is that, what is Israel winning? How do you bring that? I think they have expectations, very high expectations. Perhaps the Israeli government also has higher expectations. I'm not sure the IDF can deliver those expectations. For Israel to do XYZ in Gaza, they sit very comfortably in their chairs. In one hand, they like Israel to crush Hamas, to bash Hamas as harder as they can. This is good for them. On the other hand, they criticize Israel publicly. So they enjoy both worlds. That's a problem that we might, at the end of the war, will need to figure out somehow.
But Israel, looking, for example, staying with Saudi Arabia, has interest in Saudi Arabia. We've seen the efforts to bring the two countries together until a few weeks ago. But furthermore, we've seen the Houthis trying to hit Israel with some weaponry, being blocked by the Americans and some other aides in the area, and the Saudis play a role in that.
They played a role. According to American officials, some of the missiles were intercepted from Saudi territory. I think one of Hamas' main interests in this October 7 attack on Israel was to stop the normalization process between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Did they succeed in that? Or it's too early to tell?
First of all, it's too early to say. They stopped it, of course. There's war. One cannot negotiate during war. I think Israel's main goal is how to bring it back after the war with Hamas. So the biggest achievement, or one of the biggest achievements that Israel can bring against Hamas is actually to trigger or to bring back the negotiation process with the Saudis. That will be a blow to Hamas and to Iran, and we need to do it. The problem is it will be in different terms, on a different time frame, perhaps. So we need to look ahead. It depends also how long this campaign will last. If it's many months, it will be hard to restart the negotiation under the Biden administration was entering a campaign.
You've spoken before of Qatar, the Islamic Brotherhood. What do they want?
Qatar, slip of a tongue. Qatar is a big challenge for Israel. It's not a new challenge. The Israeli establishment, let's say, and I know I was a part of it, thinks of what to do with Qatar for many, many years. The Qatari dilemma, as I phrase it, as I call it, will stay here after the war. Because as I see it right now, as we said early, that although other Arab countries want us to crush Hamas, they don't have an appetite to really be involved the day after in Gaza to perhaps give a substitute or another alternative to Hamas. So far, unfortunately, and I say it unfortunately, but it's a fact, Qatar is the only player that is willing and able to provide for the Palestinian in Gaza. It also means that it provides for Hamas. One cannot differentiate between the two right now, unfortunately. The only thing that Israel can do, or the main thing that Israel can do, besides trying to pressure Hamas, mainly through the U.S., is just to crush Hamas. Just to crush Hamas. If we want to change the equation, the way that Qatar is involved in Gaza, the way that we don't like it and we don't want it, the only way that we can really change reality is really to crush Hamas. If not, the same reality that we saw before the war, we'll see after the war. If Hamas stays in power, perhaps weakened, but will stay in Gaza, Qatar will continue to try and play a role in providing Hamas and the citizens of Gaza with money.
But before we reach the end game, currently Qatar is maybe the only efficient, effective go-between between Israel and Hamas when we have over more than 200 hostages in Gaza.
Absolutely. This is exactly the Qatari dilemma. Qatar, in one hand, serves many interests of Israel, but derail and hurt other interests of Israel. This is the Qatari dilemma. It's not an easy dilemma. Perhaps a way out of it would be to use Qatar now, during the war, release all the hostages and the kidnapped Israelis, but after the war, and after we crush Hamas, to deal differently with Qatar, as we should.
They have history of dealing, of doing such deals, of releasing hostages. They've been doing it in Africa, in the Middle East, and furthermore. How successful
can they be in our case, which is very delicate, taking into consideration the hostility between Israel and Hamas, the current situation of war, and the amount of hostages, including 30 children, elderly women, pregnant women, etc., and many Israelis holding dual citizenships, Europeans, Americans, and others.
Unfortunately, Qatar is perhaps the most strong actor, external actors. I don't see other actors in the international community, in the regional community, that is more able than Qatar to do, because it has very good connections with all the sides, with Hamas, with Israel, with the US, with Egypt. Qatar is the only player that can do that and have the legitimacy of Hamas.
It hosts its representatives in Doha.
Absolutely, and the trust it hosted before Taliban, it hosts everyone. This is Qatar. One of the other problem that holds is Qatar enjoy very good relations with the U.S. You cannot really do anything against Qatar because then how do you explain that to the Americans? Qatar,
who holds their biggest air force base in the region, in Qatar.
It's a very complicated dilemma, and I suggest to all of those Israelis who call, let's bring the war to Qatar and let's call Qatar an enemy and let's do this and that, to hold their horses and let's think about that. This is much more complicated than we think.
So if Israel thinks of, for example, a targeted killing Hamas leaders in Doha, that's out of order currently, or totally misplaced.
I don't want to get into this.
So let's speak about Iran. Its role, obviously Iran is very happy. It has been trying to hit Israel from each and every possible angle, and Hamas has achieved it bigger than anyone else, bigger than ever. They've invested so much in Hezbollah, and Hamas has done a million times more.
In one hand, if you sit in Israel, in Riyadh, or in Abu Dhabi, you have an image of Iran hegemonic inspiration in the region. This is exactly what myself and others, yourself and others talk about in the last few years, that Iran has proxies and can simultaneously get them to work against Israel or attack Israel from Yemen, from Iraq, from Syria, from Lebanon, and of course from Gaza, and perhaps in other places as well.
And from Iran itself.
What I think they didn't expect is what the U.S. is doing in the region to counterbalance Iran's effort. Also, and because of that, you see also Iran's limitation in the region. You saw the Houthis trying to do something and then being intercepted by the U.S. and other forces. So you see also the emergence of a regional architecture that is trying to block Iran. It becomes, Yoav, a regional war. It started already to be a regional war. This is not just Gaza, Hamas, and Israel. This is regional. And perhaps it will take longer, and perhaps it will involve other players. And we need to take this into consideration. One of the first effects of that is the different pace that Israel is working and the U.S. is working. And the U.S. says to Israel, okay, please, slowly. We need to take our time. We need to bring more forces. We need to build a regional architecture now because of this regional dimension to counter Iran. So that has negative effects, but also positive effects.
I asked you, how do the Iranians see it? What's their end game? Apart from wishing Israel will not exist, but what do they want to want? For example, do they want Hezbollah to get involved or not? Do they want their militias from Iraq to get involved, to come to Syria and practically get involved? Do they want to see the Houthis firing at Israel every day? I mean, they have the ability, they have the connections, they have the influence. What do they want?
We need to differentiate between Hezbollah and the other proxies. Hezbollah is the major thing, the major proxy that Iran has built for 40 years. I don't think Iran wants to throw Hezbollah into the conflict, because it might mean losing Hezbollah. War with Hezbollah would be different, you know better than everyone, to the civilian front, to the Israeli citizens. It's not Hamas. It's something 10 times bigger than Hamas. We need to take this into consideration. And I think Iran built Hamas for another reason, to serve as a deterrent. Might his Iran nuclear infrastructure would be hit by Israel or the U.S. So I don't think Iran has an interest right now to bring the entire capability of Hezbollah into the conflict, because it also might mean U.S. and Israeli retaliation against Iran itself. I don't think Iran really wants right now a regional war. I don't think Iran is there. What it wants is a war of attrition against Israel, to slowly and gradually weaken Israel. This is what the Iranians want, and I think they are achieving this day by day. And Hamas, what Hamas did on October 7, huge surprise for Iran. Huge surprise for Iran. They didn't believe that Hamas can do that. And I think for now it's enough for them to irritate Israel from the south, from the north, from the east, from the west, perhaps. I don't think Iran wants to throw Hezbollah, but a misunderstanding and miscommunication can happen anytime, and things can happen even if the two sides, Israel and Hezbollah, doesn't want a full-scale war. It can happen.
And if we go to that direction, should Israel stay in its immediate fronts, currently the south, but it might be the north, or should Israel go to practically the octopus's body and say all links go to Iran, and Iran should pay a price not by its proxies, but practically in Iran?
If it can happen, of course. I don't think Israel can really, and this is the truth, it's perhaps the sad truth, I don't think Israel can wage war in 2-3 fronts. I mean, Hezbollah and Hamas is more than enough for Israel. Hezbollah is a different story. I repeat that. I don't think Israel can, and of course, if Israel can, it doesn't have to be now. It can be later on. Iran should pay the price. Absolutely. I am in favor of this model or perception, or that Iran should pay. Absolutely, Iran should pay. Not necessarily now, maybe in the day after.
So if we go a little bit further with that way of thinking, with that model, and you've mentioned the possibility of a regional war and not a limited war between Israel and Hamas, maybe it's in Israel's interests. Once we've paid such a huge price of 1,300 or 1,400 casualties and 200 hostages, and such a huge damage, and half of the countries has been recruited for reserve, and the US is here, and the UK is here, and the world supporting. Maybe it's time for Israel to pay a heavy price in the north as well, but to get rid of all of its enemies, including Iran, to attack Iran wherever and however we can. Maybe that should be the case, despite of that reaching a very high level of a regional war and maybe a world war, taking into consideration that the Russians are here as well.
Theoretically, I might support that. Theoretically, under certain circumstances, under those circumstances that we are right now, regionally, globally, and even internally in Israel, if you look at the Israeli politics, the fact that this government doesn't have any support from the Israeli public, and rightly so. The fact that the U.S. is here and actually stopping Israel from opening this front. The fact that the IDF has limitation on its war operation. It wants to focus on the south right now and not do other things. There's limitation on that alternative, as much as I and perhaps others would like to see that.
So if we sum all that up, if you were to advise to the Israeli government, what would be the best under the very bad circumstances or cards that are being given to us on the table, what's the best scenario, looking from the Israeli angle, for an endgame?
I'm not in any position to give advice, not to the military, not to the Israeli government.
So where should we aim to beating Hamas, eliminating Hamas?
I think that should be our goal, that Hamas will not exist as a ruler in Gaza. It's hard to listen. I hear all the talk from the government and the higher political echelon from the military. We'll crush them. We'll devastate them. I'm afraid that this is perhaps unachievable, not because the IDF cannot do that. Of course the IDF can do that, but the price that the economy, the society will pay is not something that Israel, sadly, I'm saying this sadly, can bear right now.